My house doesn't have a basement, and a lot of houses that don't have basements have crawl spaces instead, which are basically a layer of space under the lower level of a house with a height of no more than about 5 feet, usually used for storage. It started on a night like any other. I had classes the next morning, so I had to be in bed early. My room is on the first floor, and the crawl space is right below my room. After turning off the TV at like 11, I started hearing noises below me. Actually, it sounded like it was coming from right under my bed. My parents and brother were all asleep by now, so calling for any of their attention would be a little obnoxious at this point. It took a little courage, but I got on the carpet on my knees and looked under the bed, hoping I wouldn't see a rodent or any other kind of creature. There was nothing though, so I got back into bed. As I got back into bed though, the sound started up again. It was kind of a rough push and pull kind of sound. It sounded like something being done deliberately. I once again got on my knees on the side of the bed and looked underneath. There was definitely nothing under there though. Oddly enough, every time I got out of bed the sound stopped. I went to get my dad, and he took a look under the bed too. Figures there were no sounds now though. He told me he'd check the crawl space the next day to see if one of the pipes were leaking or something. I didn't even think of it being something in the crawl space. The rest of that night it was quiet, so I fell asleep with ease. When I got home from class the next day, I spotted something sticking out from under my bed. I pulled it out, and it was a bag full of old papers from like elementary school. I planned on asking my mom why she would put that in my room, but I figured I'd just throw it back down in the crawl space and forget about it. Our crawl space has its entry door inside of our garage, and my dad tends to leave the garage door open a lot during the summer months. This was so he could work in there without having the lights on while also getting some fresh air. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to sounds coming from below my room. Not my bed this time, but for some reason the sounds were especially clear this night. I knew now something had to be in the crawl space. After turning on my bedside lamp, I ran to get my dad out from bed, who was a bit irritated that I'd woken him up. He led me down to the garage and to the crawl space door. He opened the door and grabbed the flashlight that hung next to the door. As we looked inside of the crawl space, however, we noticed something strange. Light. Across the other side of the area. Light was seeping in from above. But that made no sense. There weren't supposed to be any holes in the floor. My dad crouch-walked his way to the hole. And then he screamed. Hearing my dad scream with such fear and horror was the most disturbing thing I'd ever witnessed. I didn't know what he saw, but he screamed at me to open the garage door and get out of the house. I listened without asking questions. I stood in the driveway waiting. I heard a commotion inside of the house, including a scream from my mom. 5 minutes later, my dad and older brother came outside, holding a stranger in their grips. 5 minutes later, a police car pulled up to the house, and neighbors soon started coming outside to see what the commotion was. Let me explain what happened. When my father got to that hole in the ceiling of the crawl space, he realized it was a giant hole cut open right under my bed, and as he looked through it, he saw a masked man looking down at him. As my dad grabbed at the man's arms through the hole, he screamed for my older brother's help, who luckily came to my dad's aid. Without him, my dad could have easily been killed, because that man was carrying a handgun. When I was 21, still living in my parents' house, my bedroom was actually supposed to be considered an extra room. It wasn't built with the intention of being a bedroom, more so a kind of downstairs storage room. However, I was the youngest, so I got the worst room. My 2 older brothers had already moved out by this point, and I was finishing up with college. It was winter break, however. My dad was on a business trip, and my mom was in another state with friends. They're the kind of parents who you never see around, and they've been like that since we were kids. My room happens to attach to the crawl space of our house. There's a little pull-off door in the wall. When I was little, my brothers always teased me and said there were aliens or monsters in the crawl space. Sometimes as a kid, I'd get scared by the littlest of noises coming from inside the wall next to my bed. Eventually, I outgrew that fear, obviously. I was chilling in my room, just trying to finish up all the work for my classes, when I heard some muffled noise coming from the crawl space. like literally beyond the wall right next to my bed. It wasn't any kind of thumping or tapping or anything. It just sounded like some kind of sound that would come from a person's mouth. Of course, my heart started racing as I started freaking out over it. Given that I was home alone, I couldn't just call for my huge, intimidating dad to go in there. So I opened the door to the crawlspace, and with my phone's flashlight, just aimed it in every direction in the crawlspace while still standing by the doorway. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but after not being able to see anything or anyone from the doorway, I contemplated going deeper into the crawlspace. But just then, there was a voice.
Was I making sense there? Say, sometimes I talk too much, but let me tell you something right now.
After nearly having a heart attack, I realized it was just one of those old talking Bubba toys. I didn't know what could have caused it to go off and start speaking though. I was guessing it was deep in some old bag of toys somewhere, and something was putting pressure on the trigger button. I waited by the door for the talking to stop, and when it finally did, I shut the attic door again and got back in my bed. When the time came for me to go to sleep, I turned off my laptop and the light and rolled on my side. It wasn't long after that I heard the talking Bubba go off again inside the crawlspace. Now that I knew what the sound was, it seemed much clearer. This was the last straw now. I had to get that toy out from whatever bag it was sitting in, or it would probably be going off all night. I went back to the crawlspace door, and this time actually went inside. I followed the sounds of the toy's voice, and as I got to the big brown paper bag that seemed to be containing it, I saw two arms come out from the dark. Two arms that were stretched out forward, and there was a horrifying, deep scream that accompanied them. I was being lunged at. I screamed as I ran to the crawlspace door and slammed it shut. It had a lock on it, thank God. A couple seconds after locking the door, there were bangs on the door that consistently came about every 2 seconds. The door didn't show any signs of giving, but I didn't stick around to find out if it would. I was upstairs already on the phone with the police, but I did notice the banging stopped downstairs. The police told me to wait either inside a locked room or outside in a safe place like a car or a neighbor's house. I didn't want to be in the house anymore until the cops arrived, so I took the spare keys to my car from the key ring and went to sit in my car. I had a view of the back section of my house from the street, however, and noticed a door on the side of our house was open. It was the outside crawlspace door. It was completely wide open. It suddenly makes sense how there could be someone in there. The outside door must have been left unlocked by my dad by mistake. I sat in my car telling 911 to hurry up before the intruder could escape. I didn't see anyone leave through the door, but for all I knew, they already had left. The cop car finally came roaring down the road with its lights on and stopped in front of my house. I got out of the car and called at him to follow me to the door. I pointed and said, "In there," and he went inside with his flashlight. I peeked my head in there the whole time, helping out with the flashlight too. I made sure he didn't miss anything. I even suggested that he search any big boxes or bags, and he did. The officer was surprisingly patient and polite towards my demands given the situation. He came out after a few minutes of searching and assured me the crawlspace was empty. Whoever was in there left in a hurry. The crawlspace door could only be locked with a key or from the inside, so I asked the officer to wait there while I went inside and locked the door from the inside. As I was in the crawlspace again, alone, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that I was being watched as I hurried back to my room to lock that door as well. The officer left a few minutes after, and I tried to get to sleep, but I couldn't. I was awake all night until the sun came up, just worrying about someone still being in that crawlspace. Luckily, no one ever broke into it again, but I guess I wouldn't call it breaking in, since the door was unlocked. It was 2016. I had just signed a lease to move into my first house alone. It was a fixer-upper starter home for sure, but the neighborhood wasn't bad at all really. By the first day, I had the house layout memorized, and by the third day, I was settled in. However, by the fourth day, I started to hear some weird house noises. There was a small upstairs where the 2 bedrooms and a bathroom were. The first floor was just the living room, dining room, and kitchen. When I was upstairs, I never heard the sounds. However, when I was downstairs, I'd start to hear noises come from below the floor at later hours of the night. There was a small basement technically, but it was just one little room meant to serve as a laundry room. I went down there to see if the noise could be coming from down there. There was no one down there in that room, but I could still hear noises coming from inside the wall. I felt around the wall to see if there was any kind of hollowness, and in fact there was. That meant there was some kind of room on the other side. I looked to the corner of the basement, where there was a small opening that went deeper than the rest of the room. I went over to look at it, at what I assumed to be just a tight space that could be used for storage, and learned there was actually a door in that tiny opening, a door that seemed to lead to some kind of crawlspace area. I opened the door, which just barely cleared the tiny opening, and looked inside, but it was way too dark to go in there, plus whatever the noise was seemed to stop. I could tell just based off the very front of the space, however, that the ceiling was just tall enough to walk under, maybe with a slight crouch in your step. There was no way I was looking around there at night anyway, so I shut that door, went upstairs, and locked the basement door just in case, you know. I called it a night shortly after. The next few days, things were normal. One night I heard a sound or two when I was in the basement doing laundry, but I was starting to think it was just some kind of noises that had to do with the boiler system or whatever. The next night, however, while I was in the living room, I heard thumps hitting the floor. 3 distinct thumps, actually. Now my adrenaline was rushing, as I was positive I had someone in my house. I went into defense mode and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I had and stormed downstairs. I tried to make myself angry as I approached the crawlspace door. I turned on my flashlight, opened the door, and started screaming with anger, or what I wanted to seem like anger. But really, I was shaking in my own skin as I entered that dark, cold crawlspace. It was completely empty except for what seemed to be 2 empty boxes. I must have done a complete 360, analyzing the space at least 5 times, and I knew for a fact there wasn't anything or anyone in there. Then, however, something broke the absolute silence. It was a sound that was coming from no further than like 20 feet away from me. It was the sound of breathing. In a panic, I looked in the direction of the breathing, and was horrified to see something standing in the corner of the space. I didn't know what to think, but I knew it couldn't be a real person, because I'd looked around at least 5 times and saw nobody in there just a second ago. As I stood there, frozen, I started to feel like the figure in the corner was getting closer to me. That's when I ran for the crawlspace door. When I made it outside, I looked around for something to block the door with, but found nothing, and so I ran upstairs and locked the door. That night I went to sleep at my parents' house, and the next day I harassed the landlord to let me out of the lease given what I had just experienced. It took a lot of arguing, but I managed to get out of that house within the same week. All that week, however, I stayed out from the basement, but I did continue to hear noises from down below when I was in the living room. Ever since Snapchat implemented that new Snap Maps feature, it basically lets you stalk any of your friends' locations. Well, any of your friends who choose to have it enabled. For some reason, I used to have it enabled. I guess just because I liked my friends to see that I was busy a lot or something dumb. I'm in 11th grade, a junior in high school. Snapchat is obviously a huge thing these days in high school. If you don't have one, your friends will likely question why not. Even the weird kids have Snapchat. Like the really, really weird kids. Like the ones who sit in the corner of the lunchroom alone. Maybe I sound specific in saying that, because I am being specific. There was a kid named Zach, who had been a socially awkward reject since elementary school. No one really knew if he actually had any issues or not, and everyone could agree that there was always something that seemed a bit off-putting and unpleasant about him. Apparently the kid was on Snapchat, and was somehow getting people's Snapchat usernames. My username was one of them, apparently, because one cold December day, I got Zach Meister added you as a friend from Snapchat. I already knew it was him, so I added him back. I don't know why. I guess because I'm just too friendly of a person. Minutes after adding me, he sent me a picture and then a video. I didn't want to open it because I knew it would be weird, but I was also curious to see what it was. I waited a few hours to show as much disinterest as possible. I opened it when I was in my bed, and what it was weirder than I thought it would be. It was a picture of me sitting in the lunchroom at school, but then the video was when the bell rang and everyone in the lunchroom got up, including me obviously, and he zoomed in on me and recorded me as I left the lunchroom. The worst part was the caption at the bottom, which said, "Cute LOL." I ignored it. I was so close to removing him, but for some reason I didn't have it in me to do that. That night, laying in my bed watching TV and Snapchatting friends, Zach, aka Zachmeister, messaged me on Snapchat. Unfortunately, I accidentally clicked the notification right away, which took me to his message, which said, "You live on Mason Street?" I answered back yes. He answered back immediately. I planned on not opening his chat this time though, not for a long time. But the longer I waited, the more he messaged me. I was so close to blocking him, it was not even funny. He started sending me pictures now, pictures I was not planning on opening tonight. I knew that the longer I took to respond, the less interested he would be, so I put my phone down on the desk, turned off the TV, and went to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, my window was wide open, as well as my closet door. I literally mumbled to myself, "What the fuck?" I didn't remember opening either of them, but my room was absolutely freezing. I saw a bunch of new notifications from Zach on my phone. Then it sank in. What if this was him? I opened Snapchat in a hurry and opened the snaps from Zach. It started with pictures of a sidewalk last night, then a picture of my house, then a picture of my bedroom window, then a picture of me taken through the window, then a picture of Zach standing inside of my room, then a picture of me in my bed taken from my closet. That was the last picture. Then I saw his messages. There were so many messages, a lot of them starting with, "Answer, why do you take so long to answer?" Then later on he said, "I'm gonna come visit you, LOL, you have your snap map on too." Then he said, "I like watching people sleep." Then he said, "I found you with your snap map, I hope you don't mind, I think you're cute though." I need to mention, I'm a guy in case you were wondering. The rest of the messages said things like, "Are you up yet? What are you doing?" I didn't care anymore though. I screenshotted the chat. Unfortunately, I did not think to screenshot the pictures in time before it was too late. I blocked Zach's Snapchat account and went to my parents, who were in utter disbelief. My dad mostly handled trying to contact the police, which turned into a big thing. Police had to do investigating, which got the school involved as well. Apparently Zach lives or lived with his single alcoholic father, which kind of explained a lot. The screenshots of Zach admitting he found me via snap maps served as proof. Enough proof to get Zach charged with juvenile breaking and entering. No one ever saw Zach at school again after that. It was assumed he and his father moved far away. I've been using Snapchat for a little over a year, just as a way to share cool or funny things that are going on in my life. You know that in high school there is always that one weird kid who acts like a psycho? The one who would quote-unquote prank someone by putting a dead rat in their locker? That kid at my school was named Alex. Alex had done a lot of questionable things, and he's been suspended multiple times. He had brown hair that was always a bowl cut, and had really pale skin, vampire pale. One day, I got a notification on my phone while I was playing some video game. It was from Alex. I didn't remember adding him, but then I thought he must have seen my snap code from my Instagram page or something. It was weird though, I could see his score, which means I did add him back at one point, I just don't remember when. I put my phone down until I died in the video game I was playing. I unlocked my phone and opened Alex's snap. It was an extremely zoomed in picture of a door handle, more specifically a locking mechanism. It was captioned "Hello." I actually got a screenshot of the picture. I was kind of creeped out because I knew this kid was the kind of person who would come to your house and do something really messed up. I texted him back asking why he sent me that picture. He responded with another picture. It was a blurry picture through a window, looking into a house. My heart sank when I realized it was a picture of our kitchen. I also screenshotted this picture. I ran straight to our kitchen and looked out the window. I saw him on my deck, laughing. I ran around the side to our dining room and threw open the door. He was still standing there, but he was holding his hand behind his back. I told him to get off our deck, but he slowly removed his hand from behind his back. He was holding a knife. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I yelled through the door that if he didn't leave, I would call 911. He smiled at me and slowly walked off our deck. I ran to make sure all the exterior doors were shut and locked. I don't know what he would have done if I hadn't slammed the door shut, but I hope I never have to find out. This is a short story, but it started just 2 days ago, and it has me scared shitless. I tend to get a lot of random people adding me on Snapchat because I have my Snapchat in my Instagram bio. Not to toot my own horn, but I live a kind of lavish lifestyle and show it through my Instagram pictures. One rainy night when I was chilling with my friend, 2 random girls added me on the app. One named Casey Welsh, the other Bree Owens. I added both of them back. They both had really low snap scores though. Like one had a snap score of 200, the other had a snap score of a couple thousand. I figured, okay, that was that. I'd wait and see if they sent me anything. Sure enough, the one named Casey snapped me a black screen with the caption, "You're cute." I ignored the message. It seemed like someone was messing with me. I checked the snap map and saw that both of the girls shared their locations. In fact, the 2 of them were apparently together in a car not too far away from me. Anyway, I had to go home. The weather outside was getting worse and it was getting late. I jumped in my car, got on the highway, but drove slow given how bad the rain was getting. There weren't many, if any, cars on the road at this point, until one car finally caught up behind me in the middle lane and stayed behind me for a while. I got off the highway to my town's exit, as did the car behind me. Not really weird. I took the left turn off the main road down the street towards our house. So did the car behind me though. Now it was slightly questionable. I pulled up into our house's driveway and turned off the car. The car that was behind me slowed down once it passed our driveway, then came to a halt. My heart started pumping to the point where I could feel it in my chest. I took my phone, opened Snapchat, and checked the map. Those 2 girls. It said they were right next to me on the map, right on top of my house. I shut my phone screen and felt like I was about to throw up. My dad was home, so if I could make it to the door and ring the bell a million times, maybe I'd be good. But no, it was too risky. Instead, I called the house phone. Thankfully, my dad picked up right away. I yelled into the phone, begging him to come outside. I saw the car in the street reversing to come closer to the driveway. At the same time, the front door opened and my dad came outside, looking at the car in the street. The car drove off, and only then did I run through the rain to the house. My dad hugged me and asked me who those men were. I broke away from the hug as he said this. "Men?" I asked. "How do you know, and how many?" He replied saying he saw at least 3 large men sitting in that car, looking at him as it drove off. Last night, I woke up to noises outside of my window. Like leaves crunching, garbage cans being moved around. People were outside my window. I just knew it. I knew the blinds were open. I didn't want to look. I was too horrified to look at that window. Then I heard, "I know you're up. Don't move a muscle." They're at the window. It was my dad. It was the scariest moment of my life. It sounded like my dad was hiding behind my bed. I heard footsteps outside move away, and my dad finally said it was safe. We watched as the car parked outside, the same one from the previous night, drove off. My dad and I are horrified to even go to sleep tonight. My dad said he's ready to call the cops at the slightest sign of something happening outside. If anything happens, I'll send an update. There was a house by me nicknamed Ghost House because construction was never finished on it for the longest time, and it had been sitting vacant and unfinished for years. It was on an already kind of sketchy block with a lot of houses that appeared to be either vacant or the owners of the houses just don't care about their properties because there's a lot of overgrown grass and weeds. My friends Jenny, Luca, Kylie, and I were bored just driving around town late one night. We got some fast food. Then Luca floated the idea of checking out the ghost house. Like, actually checking it out, going inside. The girls were on board, and so of course, so was I too then. We parked a few houses down. This street only had one street light, the rest of it was dark, and a lot of the houses didn't have any lights on. So it really was a dark and kinda creepy block. Like I said, the neighboring houses seemed abandoned too, even though they weren't due to cars being in some of the driveways. We were all sure to be extra quiet getting out of the car and walking over to the ghost house. Seeing this unfinished 2-story house in the dead of night gave off eerie vibes for sure. Next up, we had to figure out a way in. Of course, we tried the front door and it was locked. We then walked around the house trying every window until one of them slid right open. Jenny was the smallest, so she climbed in through the window and then went to unlock the back door for us. Only it was already unlocked, meaning anyone could have just walked right in. We entered the house that smelled like a mix of wood and some kind of rotten cat piss kind of smell. The first floor was a lot more finished than I was expecting, and it was pretty big with lots of rooms, but there was no furniture. We kind of all split up going different ways. I went up the stairs to the second floor, and up here was a bit more unfinished, with a lot of the wall framing exposed. I heard rustling around from downstairs, the sounds of my friends being a bit too loud, so I went shh really loud down the stairs. Upstairs was pretty empty, so I went back down to run into Jenny, who asked what's upstairs. I said it's a bit unfinished up there. She then proceeded to go upstairs and check it out anyway. I proceeded to look for the basement, and I found it beyond a brown door right under the stairs leading upstairs. As soon as I opened it, I got a whiff of that cat piss type smell I was talking about. I started walking down the steps, and as I got to the bottom, I could see the basement looked a little more decrepit than the rest of the house. The concrete floor was stained with some brownish, rusty-looking material. My first instinct was to think paint, but the color could also match blood. I looked around the mostly empty space and found in one corner a small wooden chair and a little table with a book on it. It was the Holy Bible. I heard footsteps coming down the steps. I said in a volume slightly above a whisper, "Yo, come check this out." When I heard no response, I turned around but didn't see anyone by the stairs. I said, "Who's there?" Then I noticed a girl sitting down, leaning on the wall. Only it took me a second to realize it wasn't Jenny or Kylie. It was some random woman with extremely long and messy hair, looking right at me. Then I heard one of the girls upstairs screaming, followed by Luca calling my name saying, "Let's get out of here." The only words I could muster up were "holy shit," and I ran out of the basement and up the stairs. I saw my friends running out through the back door. I had no idea what they had seen, but I was right behind them. We ran back out front towards the car and didn't stop until we were in. I asked them as we started to drive away what they saw, because I saw some deranged looking woman come down to the basement. Everyone was talking over each other, but one of the girls finally managed to explain that they saw 2 men standing in one of the empty rooms on the first floor. They saw some dark objects on the floor in that room, but they couldn't find out what they were in those brief seconds before running away. They didn't get a look at their faces, but they were men based on their statures. I don't know what the hell was going on in that house, and if we ran into some satanic cult, or if we just ran into some homeless people. You couldn't pay me to ever go back to that house again. I don't live in that town or state anymore, so I don't know what became of that house. But based on the most recent Google Maps picture from 2019, it still wasn't ever finished. My friends and I live in a very nice area. Try and picture the quintessential suburban neighborhood. It's relatively quiet, and people are used to the secluded, isolated feel it provides. The last place you'd expect anything dangerous to really happen. With the exception of what I'm about to tell you, my town radiated the calming silence you'd eventually come to crave. This happened a few summers ago, and as much as I try to resist it, I will never be able to erase the memory from my mind. Anyway, My friend Chaz and I had always been those kids to try to cause trouble wherever we could. Looking back, I struggled to justify our behavior. I guess it was our teenage manifestation of a rebellious spirit or some shit like that. We lived on the same street and hung out after school every single day. Because our neighborhood consisted of nothing but very large houses and towering trees, we didn't usually have much to do on weekdays, unless we wanted to journey a few towns over. So we ended up making our own fun most of the time. In our neighborhood, there was a well-known mansion at the top of a hill that had been abandoned for as long as people could remember. It wasn't really special. Every kid who lived in my town had been inside. The rooms were essentially stripped of anything of value, and finding a wall that wasn't coated with multiple layers of spray paint was almost impossible. It was especially creepy because it stood at the edge of a massive cemetery. For Chaz and I, this cemetery mansion was a kind of default, a plan B if we will. If we had nothing else to do, we'd throw some graffiti up inside or just smoke and chill on the roof. This was one of those nights. It was like 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, and Chaz and I had just been flaked on by a couple girls that we made plans with. The two of us were kind of upset, so we figured chucking rocks at the cemetery mansion would be a decent way to release some energy. Had we been sober, we might have been more cautious about doing something so stupid. But it was late, it was summer, and we didn't care. I convinced Chaz not to drive. We were more than a little drunk. And after about a 20-minute walk, we crested the hill and were met with a familiar yet eerie sight. Vines twisting and hanging down the muddied bricks, most of the windows shattered, menacing points at the tip of the roof. Definitely a sinister feel, especially at such an ungodly hour of the night. Without warning, Chaz picked up a stone and chucked it towards the house. It sailed gracefully before smashing through one of the fourth-floor windows. It was difficult to confirm in the low light of the moon and surrounding streetlights, but the deafening sound of the shattering glass confirmed it. Gleefully, I picked up a rock and did the same, puncturing one of the second-floor windows. Before the mansion's fourth floor, there was a single small window, probably an attic, that stood lonely as the highest room in the house. Chaz challenged me to hit it. I missed a good 10 throws before giving up with an aggravated sigh. Chaz grinned, picked up a rock, and said, "Watch this." He took a long look at the tiny target and launched it. I watched in awe as the rock flew through the air, shattering the attic window with a satisfying crash. I was shocked. The two of us stood there for a second, admiring what just happened. Chaz was about to pick up another rock, when I, still looking at the shattered window, saw a dark object fly out of the emptiness and sail down towards us. I literally jumped, confused as to what I just saw. Chaz and I looked down at the rock that had just landed on the gravel in front of us, the exact same rock Chaz had just thrown. It was easily recognizable, as it had a sort of Z imprint on one of the faces. The two of us stood there in silence, obviously a little shaken up. It was really late for other kids to be doing the same thing we were, but that was the only explanation we could come up with. We agreed that it must have been a group of teenagers trying to mess with us, an idea that actually excited us. The devious grins on our faces told the story. We were going to try and get the jump on them before they could scare us. The two of us quietly made our way to the front door, ducking under a thick vine that hung from the towering pillars above. The door was slightly ajar, but it always was. It had long since been misaligned from its hinges and didn't close properly. As quietly as we could, we stepped inside, our eyes adjusting to the minimal light and our noses to the smell of mildew and rotting wood. We slowly made our way up the creaky stairs, unable to silence the sound of shifting wood beneath our feet. We had made it to the fourth floor, and were positioned at the base of the final staircase. Interestingly, we had never been up there. The entrance to the roof was on the opposite side of the house, and this room must have eluded us. Chaz took the lead, and I followed directly behind. The staircase led to a small wooden door, which we presumed was the attic door. Chaz put a hand on the doorknob, and even looked back at me. I nodded, and in one fluid motion, he flung the door open. Before I could even see anything, I was struck by the smell that made me take a few reactionary steps backward. It was disgusting. It smelled like death and rot. Something was clearly decaying in that room. Chaz covered his nose and entered. I was a little more hesitant to do so, but I decided that I'd rather be by his side than alone on a pitch-black staircase. The sight was even worse than the smell. We found ourselves staring at a tiny room, the floor of which a white pentagram was painted. There were a few unlit candles and a closet door that we didn't open. The smell seemed to be emanating from that closet, and I was worried Chaz would want to investigate more. To our surprise, the room was void of people. I had enough though. This was really starting to freak me out, and I couldn't fight the urge to leave any longer. I turned towards the door, and that's when I saw it. I looked down the staircase and saw 2 cloaked figures looking back up at me. I cursed and ran towards Chaz. Just then, we heard stomping up the stairs from behind us. We were screwed. As the stomping got closer to the door, I was prepared to fend off whoever it was, bracing myself for a fight. Just then, Chaz yelled at me, "Dude, come on." I whipped around to see Chaz halfway out of the shattered window, presumably stepping on the roof. I hurriedly did the same, and the second I made it onto the roof, I heard the door forcefully open. We ran across the roof to the entrance we knew about, not wanting to wait to see if we were being followed. Had this situation not been so dire, I don't know if I would have been able to go through with our plan. The darkness made it nearly impossible to see. One wrong step and we would have been sent tumbling to our deaths. I followed close behind Chaz, and we made it to the roof entrance. It was a little hatch that led to a ladder. Chaz failed to open the hatch up. It was locked from the inside. And just then, we heard a booming voice ring out from somewhere in the distance. "They went that way," yelled the freakishly deep voice. To this day, it was the scariest thing I've ever heard anyone say. Without thinking, I stomped on the hatch as hard as I could with my right foot, and it gave way and it crashed loud enough to reveal our position to anyone in the house, let alone someone chasing us on the roof. The force of the impact caused me to fall into the hole, and had it not been for my hands reflexively grabbing the ladder, I wouldn't have been seriously hurt. Chaz screamed at me to go, so I climbed down as fast as I could, trying to ignore the pain in my leg. The 2 of us sprinted down the other staircase and burst out the back door, jumping the fence and running into the cemetery. Chaz seemed to be fine. He was literally laughing. I, on the other hand, was so scared I could barely think. I never thought squatting behind a gravestone in a cemetery could be so comforting. Chaz and I maintained a watchful eye on the mansion, half expecting someone to be following us. We waited, and just when we thought the coast was clear, we saw a group of 4 or 5 cloaked figures circling the property, frantically searching under bushes and trees. The 2 of us crept closer into the cemetery, until we were sure there was no chance we could be spotted in the darkness. We hopped the backside fence, and haven't been back to that house since. I can only assume that we stumbled upon some kind of cult meeting or ritual. Why they decided to do it in an abandoned house is something I still ask myself. This was the year 2017, when I was rushing a frat in college. Towards the end of our pledge process, our entire pledge class took a trip to an abandoned hospital a few towns over. It was a sort of tradition that each pledge class would do. I carpooled with a few of my pledge brothers. There's honestly just too many names to list, so I'll just name my pledge brother that I spent most of the night with, Joshua. Joshua and I and a couple others carpooled to the hospital, which sat next to a big park, so all of us parked in one of the parking lots in the park. We waited till everyone was there, then started walking down a pathway in the direction of the hospital, until the pathway cut right, and at this point we had to walk through the small patch of woods separating the park from the hospital. I honestly wore the wrong shoes for this. I was complaining about wearing my white Air Force Ones. After making our way through the woods, we got to the property of the hospital, surrounded by trees and a parking lot on all sides. Seeing such a tall building, once full of people and lights, standing completely dark in the night, was really creepy. It was my first time ever exploring this building. A couple of the guys in the group knew the secret ways in, one of which being simply climbing through one of the lower windows that was smashed through. I followed close to the back of the group. One by one, we stepped down through this window, leading to a level beneath the ground. The floor on this level was wet, making me really regret my shoe choice now. Joshua and I stayed in the back, following behind the rest. There were like 10 of us, so being in such a large group took away most of the scariness of being in a place like this. We went up the stairs. Everyone's steps echoed through the building. We traversed the creepy hallways that had been abandoned for decades, the walls surprisingly not littered with graffiti. James, one of the guys who was very experienced with this place, said not a lot of people break in because no one thinks to cut through the park to avoid the security in front of the parking lot. Eventually the group started to split up a little bit. A small group of guys went this way, a small group of guys went that way. We were on, I think, the 2nd floor, when Joshua and I decided to go down this separate hallway/corridor. Some of the rooms in this place seemed like they hadn't even been gone through since the place closed down. Others looked like they'd been rummaged through, and had small amounts of graffiti in them. Joshua and I were in a hospital room with the bed and medical equipment still in there when we heard someone walk past the doorway to the room. We both turned and caught just a glimpse of a black shadow walking past the door out of view. We both looked at each other, then said, "Yo, who is that?" I walked into the hall, and at the end of it, I saw someone standing there. I couldn't tell if they were facing me or facing the wall. All I saw was their body. I said, "Who is that?" Then whoever it was walked into the room next to them. Joshua came into the corridor now, and was confused at what I saw. I told him someone was here, and we should just go back to the group. We left down the opposite direction, back towards our group. We eventually started to hear the echoing voices of our pledge brothers. As we were getting closer, all of a sudden, there was an almost deafeningly loud, blood-curdling scream of a woman coming from the direction we just came from. If I had to describe the screams, it sounded like a woman being brutally stabbed to death. I noticed the sounds of our pledge brothers went silent now, or maybe the screams just overpowered the sounds of their voices. We ran back towards our friends and screamed, "Go!" All of us ran back downstairs to the lower level where we entered from. Somehow I found myself in the back of the group again. One by one, we all crawled out from that window. The screaming stopped, but now we heard footsteps stomping down the stairs. They weren't the footsteps of anyone in our group. I was screaming, "Go, hurry up." Finally, after Joshua crawled out, I crawled out, the whole time fearing someone would grab my feet. We booked it back towards the cars through the woods. After we got to the cars and caught our breath, I told everyone I saw a person in the corridor where Joshua and I were. That's where the screams were coming from. We all left shortly after that, definitely freaked out. I'm not really interested in urban exploration anymore. This experience happened to me in 2020. The world was shutting down because of COVID and everyone was cooped up in their homes. Being an avid backpacker and camper, I used COVID as an excuse to travel to different national parks and camp out in different places. One of those places was a creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Without giving away my identity or revealing too much personal information, let's just say something happened with my job back in 2019 that caused my reputation to kind of suffer a bit, and a good number of people despised me. I had to change apartments, get a new phone number, and eventually quit my job. The mistake I made caused a good number of people to lose a lot of money, so the shitstorm was expected. I just didn't know how far it would go. I was literally getting harassed by different random numbers for a while. Some texts were even threatening. I didn't know if they were from the same person or different people each time, but I considered the possibility that it was one person texting me from a bunch of different numbers. For a while it seemed to stop, and I was grateful that people seemed to lose interest or just move on. I wasn't working around this time, I was taking time to myself, hence another reason I was traveling around to different national parks. I drove the 3 hours to Rocky Mountain National Park, parked my truck, and started my hike up the trail to the creek. There was nobody else there. I'm sure that was because this was right when the lockdown started and people were taking it very seriously and not leaving their houses. That, and it was also still the winter time. There was a thin sheet of snow on the ground, hard enough that it made that loud crunching sound with every footstep. After a little while, I made it to the creek, and it wasn't frozen, it was still flowing. It was incredibly peaceful, and this was a detox I needed from the stresses of my life at the time. I found a place a little ways off the path to set up camp. After the tent was set up, I chopped up some wood, started a fire, and cooked some sausages on the stove. Then I started reading my book by the fire. After finishing a few chapters, it was getting dark out. Thank God for headlamps. I rolled a J and started smoking it. After a few hits, I felt my phone start going off. Honestly, apart from my family, I don't have a lot of people texting me, so I pulled out my phone from my jacket pocket and saw a bunch of texts from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was happening again. The texts were from a number with a 203 area code, which I looked up to be Connecticut. Whoever it was texted me saying, "How's your camping going, buddy?" The second text said, "It's beautiful out here." The third text said, "I see why you came up here." My default reaction was to respond, "Who is this?" If they simply left it at "How's the camping going?" I would have assumed it was a family member, but they were sending messages as if they were here with me. The weed had already entered my system and I was definitely high. This did not help my anxiety one bit. I felt extremely paranoid and started looking around me, standing up and doing a complete 360, looking in every direction out to the increasingly darkening woods. I went to get my P365 handgun from my bag just to make me feel safer. Usually I'd put a fire out before calling it a night, but as paranoid as I was feeling now, the thought of being in total darkness freaked me out. I went into the tent and crawled onto my sleeping bag. I stared at my phone, at the texts, waiting for a response which didn't come. Minutes dragged on, and I just wanted the weed to wear off, honestly. I still had my headlamp on, so I tried to continue where I left off in my book, but between being high and my mind being stuck on those texts, I was kidding myself thinking I could read. I decided to just watch YouTube videos on my phone to pass the time. I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep just yet. I was watching some murder documentary on YouTube. I know, a pretty interesting choice considering the setting, and when I least expected it, I got another text. A response to my question before. They responded, "Doesn't matter anymore." My heart started racing all over again. I replied back, "How did you know I'm camping?" But once again, no response after this. The anxiety of this situation was weighing heavier and heavier on me. Was this a prank by a friend or family member? Or was this one of those people harassing me again? But if it was the latter, how would they know I'm camping? That's the really uncomfortable part. I managed to kill an hour just watching videos on my phone, and I noticed the glow from the fire outside was growing dimmer and dimmer as the fire died down to almost nothing. In the wintertime, without the sound of bugs, the woods are dead silent apart from wind on a windy night. The second a video would stop playing, the silence would become deafening. Usually I'd embrace the peace, but my peace was completely disturbed because of these texts. Something then broke the silence. The unmistakable sound of human footsteps in the snow. They approached my tent until they were only maybe 6 feet from outside the tent. Then the footsteps stopped. I had the gun tightly gripped in my hand, ready to turn the safety off. There was suddenly a flash from outside. It looked like someone briefly shined a flashlight at the tent, or they took a picture. I had my answer soon enough. I heard the person walk away now, before their footsteps slowly faded out to silence, and as I expected to happen in the back of my mind, my phone dinged and vibrated, and that number sent me a photo. The photo was of my tent. Following that was a text that said, "Have a good night's sleep." I can't explain it, but suddenly it felt like I completely snapped out of the remainder of my high, and a bout of adrenaline and confidence overwhelmed me. I unzipped the tent and shot 2 rounds into the air, and the sound of footsteps running away in the snow in the not-so-far distance told me that it worked and scared the person off. But it also disturbed me even more, that would mean they were still hiding somewhere in the distance, watching. I screamed a threat into the air and climbed back inside my tent. I believe it worked because there were no more texts and no more sounds of footsteps. I was awake for hours after, simply because the occurrence completely woke me up. I felt like I drank 3 cups of coffee. Eventually, I did fall asleep, and waking up to morning sunlight was a huge relief. Whoever followed me there was not ready for me to pull a gun. I definitely don't seem the type of person that would own a gun, and I know that. That was my first time shooting that gun since buying it, and in fact my only time to this day. Whoever had been texting me, harassing me, and apparently stalking me, apparently decided to back off when they found out I had a gun, because almost 5 years later now, and I haven't been bothered. Still, it was a nightmarish night, and I can't imagine how differently it might have turned out if I wasn't armed. During my childhood, every year my family would have a tradition where we'd all go up to northern Michigan for a weekend in October. Our Uncle Jim used to own a 4-acre property up there. The house on the property could fit a lot of people, with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. 2 bedrooms were set up for my cousins and my siblings, so my brother and sister in one room and our 4 cousins in another room. The other rooms were for all of our parents. My Uncle Jim has always been a big hunter and fisherman. He'd go on camping trips specifically for hunting all around the country. My dad has gone camping with him a few times, even though he's an animal lover and would never harm a fly. Part of the 4 acres that my uncle owned was a big chunk of forest. He marked a line of trees with red paint to mark the property line. Beyond that was just forest owned by the county, I don't know. The nearest house in that direction was probably miles away. Me, my brother Adam, and my cousins Jake and Joe all came up with an idea at lunch when our dads were talking about hunting. We wanted to go camping in the woods that night. Our dads were on board with it. They were definitely already kind of drunk, so more likely to say yes to stuff. Our moms weren't as on board, but they didn't directly say no. So my dad and Uncle Jim took the 4 of us into the woods with a tent. My girl cousins and sister were not involved in this. It was just us boys. They led us into the woods, and when Joey, the youngest of us, started complaining that it's too far, they started laughing. That's how our dads are when they're together, especially when they drink. They loved messing with us as kids. Speaking of ages, I'm oldest. At the time, I was around 13. Adam and Jake were around 10, and Joe was around 9. We went beyond the property line, as there was this small clearing in the woods with a bunch of soft green, mossy-looking stuff that my uncle referred to as deer beds, I'm pretty sure. He said it was perfect for a campsite, and that he's used it before. My dad and Uncle Jim kind of gave us a half-drunk lesson on setting up a tent. They made us help out so that it wasn't just them doing all of the work. It was a really big tent, big enough for 4 people, especially kids. Once it was set up, we put our sleeping bags inside. We did this during the day because obviously it was infinitely easier than doing it at night. After all of that, we went back to the house and played games outside until dinner time. At dinner, our moms again expressed that they weren't fans of this idea, that we were too young to be out in the woods alone. Our dads insisted that we'd be fine, and I remember my dad making a joke that we'd be close enough for them to hear our screams if something were to go wrong. It wasn't until later on that our dads led us back into the woods to the tent. We all had flashlights and extra blankets since it was cold at night. I also brought a deck of Uno cards for us to play. When we all got situated in the tent, my dad and Uncle Jim left back to the house. We were suddenly alone in the woods. Honestly, we weren't as close to the house as you think. We were deep enough into the woods where you couldn't see any light from the house. We started playing Uno for a while. I'd say half an hour at least. Playing Uno is actually a really good time killer. It passes the time really well. The tent was lit up by our flashlights arranged in a circle. All was fun and swell, until we heard a scream in the distance. It sounded like a girl's scream. We all went silent and looked at one another with the same faces. I then remembered that foxes' screams sound like the scream of a woman, so I told everyone that. I saw how freaked out Joe was especially, but my statement calmed everyone down. We continued to play Uno. I actually won like every single round. At that point, no one had mentioned the scream again. It was most likely out of all of our minds. But it happened again, and much louder and closer this time. This time, it sounded a lot more human. We all went silent again. This time, even I was freaked out. Joe looked like he was going to cry. I told everyone to turn their flashlights off. We crawled to our respective sleeping bags and sat in the darkness. None of us had the courage to run out into the woods back to the house. It's that fear of running and being chased, and just catching the attention of whatever was out there with the sound of our footsteps. Somehow hiding inside of a cloth tent felt like the safer option, so we waited and waited in silence. We still whispered amongst each other, wondering if it could still be a fox. I was truthful and said, I don't know, hopefully. I don't know who heard it first, but we all sprung up and looked at one another again when we heard very fast footsteps crunching the leaves approaching the tent. Then they stopped, and there was an ear-piercing, gut-wrenching scream that sounded like a girl or woman's scream. It was right outside the tent, and the tent started shaking violently. All of us started screaming. Jake and Jim were screaming in fear, while my brother and I were screaming stuff like, "Get out of the tent." I unzipped the door to the tent, and one by one, we all ran into the woods with our flashlights on, the only reason we could see anything. That run back to the house was the most on-edge moment of my life, like a life or death kind of feeling. We made it to the property screaming the whole way, and our entire family was already outside in response to it. All 4 of us made it back safely. We explained the screams and the tent shaking, and they were all shocked and horrified based on their reactions. Then I noticed our cousins Jamie and Christina and my sister weren't outside. I called out my dad and uncle, accusing them of sending one of the girls to scare us, but when he showed us that the girls were already in bed, that's when it was clear. Someone we didn't know was out in the woods. Our dads went out to the woods with a couple of rifles and returned after a while, having found nobody. The next day, we all helped in bringing the tent and other stuff back to the house. Obviously, you can guess that was a one-and-done thing. We never camped out in those woods again. Hell, we didn't even play outside after dark anymore. What kid would after such an experience? My guess is as good as anybody's as to who was outside of our tent and why they were doing what they did. What I'm about to tell you still leaves me to question what is real and what's not. This happened to my dad and I, and even now, 2 years later, I get chills just thinking about it. I know how it sounds. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either, but I swear to you, every word is true. 2 years ago, my dad and I traveled to go camping at a spot out in the deep country. We enjoyed doing this as it was often a very nice time to get away from real life. This place in particular was a nice spot. Hiking trails, zip lines, a bit touristy, but it has deep history. Native American lands, you know? First night there, it was perfect. Families at other campsites, campfires everywhere, kids laughing, the kind of peaceful night you go camping for. We cooked hot dogs, roasted marshmallows, cracked open a few beers, and made small talk with the people around us. A typical peaceful first night. But the second night is when things started to change. The staff told us we were the only ones in the park. Nobody else booked a site at first. We were psyched. A whole campground to ourselves. It sounded peaceful. We spent the day hiking, fishing, taking it slow. At one point, we listened to a scary podcast while sitting by the river because, you know, why not lean into the spooky atmosphere? We thought we were being funny. By the time the sun started setting, we were feeling good. A little buzzed from the beers, tired in that satisfying way after a long day outdoors. We decided to head to the park's information center to charge our phones and grab some snacks before it got too dark. The walk back to our campsite, that's when the unease set in. The woods felt different. The air was heavier. The sky had this weird tint, like twilight didn't want to leave. My dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't this feel off? Like we're in some kind of dream?" And he was right, it did. The forest felt endless, stretching out in every direction. My chest got tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We didn't say much after that, just kept walking, both of us glancing over our shoulders like we expected to see something lurking in the trees. Back at camp, we stayed close to the fire. We didn't really talk about the weird feeling. We didn't need to. It was like we both silently agreed to keep things normal, pretending nothing was wrong. We roasted marshmallows, played music, even smoked some weed to try and distract ourselves. Not the typical father-son moment you would expect, but by the time the sun dipped below the trees, we could no longer see what was in front of us, except for the fire. That's when the uneasy feeling had grown into something worse. As we sat by the campfire and roasted some s'mores, I want to say at about 9 o'clock, we heard a noise. It was a bang, as if a tree fell. It came out of nowhere, loud and close. It echoed through the woods from the direction of the river, maybe 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the sound, but there was nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, nothing. Bigfoot, we joked, nervous laughs slipping out, but neither of us believed it. A few minutes passed, then it came again, louder this time. Farther off, but the same sound, same weight. We shined our lights again, but the forest swallowed our flashlights, allowing us to see only the trees surrounding our tent. And then the third bang, closer. That's when the fear hit. Whatever it was moving toward us, like it was circling the campsite. Then, not even before we were able to collect our thoughts, the fourth bang happened. About 20 yards away, maybe less. That's when the real fear and adrenaline set in. Whatever high I had going from the weed was now long gone. My dad turned to me with his eyes wide. I saw the fear in his face. We agreed to get in the tent. We quickly scrambled and threw the last of the firewood onto the fire, hoping the flames would scare off whatever was out there. Then we scrambled into the tent, leaving everything else behind. I ran inside of the tent and quickly dropped to the ground, lying flat, my dad moving a little slower, following right behind me. As he was about to get into the tent is when the loudest bang happened, so close it felt like the ground shook. My dad froze, staring out into the dark. I said his name, grabbing his attention as he stared in shock, then quickly jumping into the tent. He muttered, "It's standing there." "What's standing there?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, his voice trembling. It was like a wall of darkness. He sat by the zipper as I buried myself under my sleeping bag, trying to move as quietly as I could. He sat there clutching the only weapon we had, a small knife. Useless really, but it was all we had. Then came this vibration noise that is still hard to explain to this day. It started low like a hum, but it wasn't just sound. It filled the air. It was a feeling inside of us, making our chests tight. I've never felt anything like it. My dad whispered, "You hear that?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, too scared to make a sound, with the feeling as if we were being hunted. This went on for about 5 minutes as we sat in silence. And then, this other sound. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't human. It was this guttural, alien-like noise, as I like to put it. It honestly sounded like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. Nothing I have ever heard before. We stayed frozen in that tent, too scared to breathe, too scared to move. I had this small mesh window right by where I was laying, but I refused to look outside of it with the fear of being seen, just sitting there trying to control my breathing as my dad still sat there with the knife. And that's when the weirdest thing happened. In the middle of all of the chaos, we just blacked out. Neither of us remembered trying to fall asleep. My dad was still clutching the knife when we woke up, lying in the middle of the tent. I woke up on my back in a panic, as if something was standing over me. My first thought was to grab my phone to check the time, but it was dead. I asked my dad to check his. Dead too. Both had been fully charged the night before, making sure we had them working in case of an emergency. We stepped outside to pee. As we stood 5 feet from the tent and peed back to back, still scared out of our minds, we saw that it was still pitch black outside. The air was cold and still. The food we'd left on the table completely untouched. The fire we'd stoked before diving into the tent burned down to ash like it was never touched. The whole place felt wrong, like we shouldn't have been there. We waited the night out in the tent without saying much to each other, just trying to get some real sleep. We packed up in silence, not saying a word until we were in the car. When we finally talked about it, we realized we'd both felt the same thing that night. Watched and hunted, like something was waiting for us to slip up. We told my mom when we got back. She thought we were crazy, said maybe we got drugged or inhaled some weird gas, but it wasn't that. Whatever happened that night, it was real. We both experienced the same thing. To this day, we don't know what it was. We didn't see it. Not fully, but my dad came closest. Whatever he saw, it wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. We never heard any similar story like ours. We haven't been back to that camping site since, or even gone camping since. I don't think we ever will. As a summer-themed video, today's stories focus on a beach theme. Before getting into these, I would like to talk about today's sponsor, Fume. We all have bad habits, and sometimes breaking these habits can be tough. Like when you're out with friends and they're all reaching for their bad habits, you may feel that urge to not be the odd one out. Fume is here to help you kick those bad habits in an enjoyable way with something that you could take out with you. Flavored air device is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking, and Fume is the leader in that category. Fume fills the void ditching a bad habit can leave, while you still have something to reach for. It has no vapor or nicotine, and you can use it anywhere. Crisp mint is my favorite flavor, and with non-toxic flavors, it's a guilt-free alternative. And my favorite part is it requires no batteries, so you'll never need to charge it. The piece also looks cool and is made to be fidgeted with to help calm potential anxiety with magnets, snaps, and clicks. Fume is also backed by doctors in the US. Having served over 300,000 customers, you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code NIGHTMARE to get your free Fume base when you order the Journey Pack. It's the all-new magnetic stand for your fume device. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code NIGHTMARE, or scan the QR code on screen. Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town. My specific neighborhood was about a 20-minute walk from the beach. I'd say about 80% of my personality was beach-related. I've been surfing longer than I've been able to speak, and it would be an anomaly for me to shake out a pair of shoes and not have some amount of sand fall out. My two best friends, let's call them Armand and Chuck, were extroverted, outgoing, and charismatic. We were all 18 and very much obsessed with girls. It was a Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before school let out. Senioritis had long since set in, and at this point, my friends and I regularly pushed the limits of how much we could get away with without getting in trouble. We already had our coveted college acceptances, so we didn't really care much about high school anymore. Armand and I had plans to meet up with two girls from our high school that we'd been getting along with really well at school. The plan was to pick the two of them up in the evening and enjoy a cool, breezy night on the beach. We had blankets and a few bottles of wine, the perfect combinations for stargazing on the beach. I don't condone drinking and driving to any capacity, but I was just a stupid kid. I arrived at Sophia's house just after 9. Her and Fran sort of walk-danced to the car. It was clear that they had a little something to drink beforehand. Armand and I exchanged some excited grins. It was going to be a fun night. I took a scenic route to a scenic beach. It was about a 30-minute drive. The whole time, the four of us were having a great time in the car, cracking jokes and talking about some mutual friends. At one point, Fran and I were having a very deep philosophical conversation about the nature of time and death and such. We were all very much enjoying each other's company. The specific beach I had chosen had a dirt path that you could drive a car up. From there was a more narrow sand path that we would walk. The path was actually pretty steep, but I had picked it because we were less likely to encounter any other people at such a secluded spot. Furthermore, this beach was further away from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I thought of everything. I parked my car as far up the dirt road as possible, and the four of us hopped out. Armand and I carried the blankets and wine. I'll fast forward through the boring stuff. After a few hours and an empty bottle, Armand and I found ourselves separating. He and Fran walked up the beach, and Sophia and I walked in the opposite direction. After being separated by a decent amount of distance and darkness, I threw my blanket down and we drunkenly fell asleep on top of it. Before anything happened, Sophia tensed up. At first, I thought it was something that I had done, but then she whispered something. "Do you hear that?" I focused my attention and strained my ears, trying to hear something other than the gentle crashing of ocean waves. I assumed she was just drunk, but then, to my surprise, I did hear something. It sounded almost like a whirring, like the sound a small engine would make. The sound seemed to be moving around. I couldn't pin down where it was even coming from. Then it seemed to fade away into nothingness. "It's nothing," I assured her, eager to resume what we had been doing. And that's what we did. Soon after, I fished my shirt from the sand and shook it out before throwing it over my head. Just then, Sophia, who was still lying on the blanket, shrieked. I whipped around to look at her and saw she was pointing up at something. I looked up, but couldn't see anything besides the blackness of the sky. I sat down next to her to get a better angle, and I was horrified. From her point of view, the moon was perfectly aligned with what appeared to be a drone floating directly overhead. It hovered a little while longer before zipping up into the dark sky and disappearing out of sight. It all made sense. That noise that we had heard before was 100% the drone. I got angry at myself for not realizing at the time. I then got sick at the thought of being watched that entire time. I glanced over at Sophia and could tell she had the same exact feeling. She put her head in her hands and started crying. I consoled her as best I could before suggesting we walk back to the car. The two of us made it to the car to find Armand and Fran already there. I quickly explained the situation. The two of them were dumbfounded, and I could feel the joy in the air literally being sucked out. I began driving in silence in the direction of Sophia's house, eventually trying to lighten the mood with some conversation. It didn't work, though. The girls agreed that they didn't feel safe going home just yet. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I asked if we could hang out at either of their houses. They both shook their heads, saying their parents wouldn't allow it. My house was off the table for the same reason. as was Armand's. I decided to ask Armand to call up Chuck, which he did. Chuck's house was massive and his parents were super chill. It was honestly the perfect spot. To our delight, Chuck was free. I pulled into Chuck's driveway and parked the car. Armand and the two girls began making their way towards Chuck's front door, and I told them I'd catch up to them in a second. I needed a second to think about everything that had just happened. I was more shaken up than I was letting on, so I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm down a bit. Honestly, those few seconds with my eyes closed really helped. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, which I hadn't even touched since the incident. The screen lit up, and I stared at the single notification that sat on the display. I had to blink a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My entire body froze as I stared in horror at the lone notification. AirTag found moving with you. Every emotion that I had just expelled from my body came crashing back. We were literally being tracked. I snapped out of my paralysis and jumped out of the car, examining every inch of the vehicle. Nothing on the front bumper, nothing in the grille, and nothing on the back. I started getting desperate, checking the seats and flipping floor mats. Still nothing. By now, sweat was pouring down my neck, and I could feel the hairs on my arms and legs clamping up. I got on my hands and knees and began examining the underside of my car. I got to the tire on the driver's side and began feeling around the tire well. And there it was. It was literally taped to the underside of the well. Impossible to find if you didn't know what you were looking for. I held the tag in my hand for a few seconds before throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. Whoever had watched us on the beach with that drone knew where we were. I didn't feel safe in Chuck's driveway all alone. I picked up one of the broken AirTag pieces and ran over to Chuck's front door. I told everyone what I had discovered, showing them the AirTag pieces to prove it. They were even more horrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. Chuck was particularly pissed off because we had been potentially tracked back to his house. After the panic subsided, we spent the rest of the night in Chuck's basement and ended up sleeping over. A couple weeks passed and nothing happened. Honestly, my friends and I were glad to forget about the whole thing, assuming it was entirely in the past now. The only way we could rationalize it was that some creep wanted to watch some young adults hook up on the beach and track their car to scare them. It was chilling to think about, but we were relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. One Sunday morning, about 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from Chuck. He screamed through the phone for me to drive to his house as soon as possible, which I did. When I got there, he was standing in his driveway with a concerned look on his face and some paper in his hand. I was confused until I realized what he was holding. They weren't papers, but rather pictures. I examined them more closely. Pictures of me from that night on the beach. They were grainy and dimly lit, but you could clearly see Sophia and I in revealing fashion. I was disgusted. I could only imagine how Sophia would feel upon finding out. Not knowing what to do, we called the police and explained the situation. They told us that there was essentially nothing they could do, but we insisted that they at least scan the photos for prints. They eventually got back to us saying the photos turned up nothing. Sophia was terrified that whoever sent them would try and blackmail her, and I feared the same. The experience was downright traumatizing. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that, probably because we had gotten the police involved. Sophia was never quite the same around me after what happened, and I can't blame her. I can only hope those pictures don't turn up later in my life. My best friend Ricardo and I were 19. At the risk of sounding pretentious, the two of us come from well-off North Jersey families and get to enjoy our summers down the Jersey Shore. My house is in Belmar, New Jersey, and his is in La Valette. It was a random summer night during the week, and Ricardo was driving the two of us from my house in Belmar down to La Valette, about an hour drive. To be completely honest, I preferred hanging out in Ricardo's house, not only because it was a little nicer, but because the general vibe of La Valette is more geared towards kids our age. If we weren't scouring the area for a party, we could enjoy some drinks on one of the many private beaches we technically weren't supposed to be on. I could go on and on about things to do down the shore, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try my best to get to the point. As we were driving down, we agreed that we'd opt for a quieter night. No partying, links, or anything that we might normally do. The two of us agreed to snag a few beers, roll a joint, and chill on one of the private beaches under the stars. Honestly, it sounded great. The two of us had been going pretty hard with some of our other friends. A break from partying was much needed. To anyone unfamiliar with the layout of La Valette, there's a beach side and a bay side. Most of the beaches feature a really high dune and a steep drop-off as you approach the ocean. If you were to stand at the ocean edge and look back, you'd see a pretty sizable hill of sand. After drinking a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we snagged some bikes from his garage and made our way toward the beach of our choice. For whatever reason, Ricardo insisted on journeying further than I'd ever been, which I didn't quite understand since all the beaches were basically the same. I really didn't mind a longer bike ride though, so I just went with it. Eventually, Ricardo decided on a desolate-looking beach at the end of the road with no cars parked on it. Every house on the street had its lights off. I actually preferred this. This was back when weed was illegal in New Jersey, and we weren't too keen on getting caught. Plus, we did have some drinks with us despite the fact that we were only 19. We hid our bikes under some shrubs. Then we made our way toward the beach. The two of us lit our J and smoked under the stars, the only sound being the light waves of the ocean and the accompanying wind. The beach stretched on endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool underneath our feet. The two of us got progressively drunker while we filled the air with laughter and conversation. Eventually, we just laid back in the sand, watching a sky full of stars in hopes of witnessing a shooting star. That's when we heard it. I heard it first. It was almost undetectable. The sound was like a metallic buzzing, sort of like the sound you'd hear in a massive gymnasium with large overhead lights. I really can't describe the sound any better. It was a faint, metallic buzz that couldn't possibly be anything caused by the beach. I sat up and stared at Ricardo, and I could tell the moment he started to hear it too. The two of us whipped our heads in every direction, looking into the darkness for the source of the drone. Strangely, it was difficult to pin down exactly where the sound was coming from. It was just too faint to tell. We were beginning to get freaked out, but were too terrified to move. We assumed that whatever was making that noise would go away, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. There was literally no way we could be seen from our spot on that beach. It was way too dark, and the sound of the ocean definitely drowned out any sounds we had been making. I know it doesn't exactly sound scary, but I'd be lying if I said my heart wasn't pounding out of my chest. The drone continued on, and after another few minutes, Ricardo gestured for me to follow him. I nodded my head in agreement. Leaving was definitely the best option. Just like a scene from a movie, the exact second the two of us stood up, the droning went from a 1 to a 5. It took every ounce of self-control I had to resist the urge to yell in fear. It wasn't a gradual shift. The sound literally increased in a split second, and it was definitely coming from our right. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me, tensing my body from head to toe. We stared into the darkness and still didn't see anything. But now the drone sounded so close to us that we instinctively started running toward the sand dune. I didn't even know what we were running from. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong and there was someone or something after us. As we were about halfway to the dune, I felt Ricardo place a firm hand on my shoulder, abruptly stopping me from continuing to run. At first, I was confused, but then I saw what his gaze was fixated on. I glanced up toward the dune and saw it. There was a dark figure standing motionlessly at the peak of the dune. Its arms were freakishly long, almost reaching its knees. It was ridiculously tall, and I was shocked at how it managed to stand so still. It was truly terrifying. Ricardo shouted at me, breaking my gaze from the figure, and we continued running, this time parallel to the beach. We ran to the next dune entrance and sprinted up the slope. As we made our way to the peak, we looked back at where we had just came from. I can still remember the terrifying sight that followed. Not only was the dark figure still on the dune, but there were maybe 3 or 4 more standing motionless on the slope. Each one looked like they were facing us. We didn't have time to go back for our bikes, instead opting to run the entire way home. The next morning, we retraced our steps, but couldn't for the lives of us find those bikes. Maybe they had been stolen, or maybe whoever or whatever was stalking us the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I've never experienced anything scarier on a beach and still have trouble explaining most of these events. The weirdest thing for me is I was never able to determine what the buzzing drone was, and to this day, have not heard anything even remotely close to it. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joint. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat, which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night. Breakups are tough, even when you know they're for the best. I'd been trying to keep myself together after splitting up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't really want to get into it. It wasn't messy or dramatic. We just weren't right for each other anymore, but that didn't make it any easier. Some days, it felt like everything reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to stick to no contact, telling myself that it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was hard though, really hard. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty decent player, definitely better than average, but my ex, he was incredible on his good days. He could pull off trick shots like it was nothing. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning a standard mass. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously we're young, and staying inside every night wasn't exactly ideal. When we did go out, we always made sure that wherever we were going, usually a bar, had some pool tables. We hated crowded bars with long waits for tables and screaming patrons though, so the places we went were quieter, usually attracting an older crowd. Dive bars with old, scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were definitely a better shout than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't care. At that point in our relationship, we had grown somewhat bored of the typical college, let's get plastered every night mentality. Plus, even though I'm kind of shy, my ex was pretty charismatic and would get along with anyone. Us not being total newbies at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to go to. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not the type of person, nor do I usually have the confidence to go out myself, but I was feeling some type of way that night. The bar was exactly the same as I remembered. Dim lighting, worn out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, but it also stung. The memories came flooding back, and I almost turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking a cue. I'm not really sure what I was planning on doing there. Playing alone would have been a little odd. Luckily, my question was answered because a guy walked over. He was maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room even close to my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack him up. He put some money in the slot and started racking the balls. I laughed to myself as he racked them wrong, but I didn't say anything. We played a few rounds, and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't going easy on him though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the brightest guy in the world. I like sharp and quick-witted guys who can hold their own in a conversation. This guy, not so much. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to just play and talk and not overthink things for once. I was having a good time. After the 4th game, he popped the question, asking if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I couldn't have been too shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head. I tried to make it playful, saying he'd need a second date for that. In all honesty, I just didn't want to move so quickly. I guess I wouldn't have been totally opposed to taking things further with him, but a random Wednesday night wasn't the time for that. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down though, because his entire demeanor changed. His smile dropped, and he literally started scowling at me. I was not prepared for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist, saying something about spending all that money on those drinks. Before I could respond, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in a situation like that, so instead of screaming or fighting, I just kind of froze up. Even though we were in a public place, I was still terrified. Luckily, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. I'm honestly not sure what I would have done had they not. One of them told the guy to let me go. The guy glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming right out of the bar. My heart was still racing, and I thanked those guys profusely for helping me out. That was it for me though. I called an Uber and left the bar, still kind of shocked and trying to process what had just happened. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the Uber driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my bag for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it. That god-awful notification, AirTag found moving with you. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started to shake as I rummaged through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, way worse than what I was feeling earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it a bunch of times until I was sure it was broken. I fought back a scream and started breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag, probably that guy from the bar, would know exactly where I was. Maybe not my exact house, but the street for sure. The houses on my street are large and spaced out, so he'd definitely be able to narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. Normally I'm asleep by 10 and out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the scenery would lull me to sleep or something. As I was looking out the window, kind of mindlessly, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln drive slowly past my house. Nothing too unusual, but it was kind of late for cars to be driving on a residential road. But then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was wrong. It passed even slower the second time, like the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of the situation, but when it passed a third time, I had no choice. It was the guy. It had to be. He was trying to find my house. I wanted to scream again. The next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want that guy to know he was in the right area. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I was so scared and couldn't think straight. The next time the car passed, the driver's hand was hanging out of the window, holding something. It looked like a knife. And then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road, right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart beating a million beats a minute again. I stayed there, crouched below the window, too terrified to move. By the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I told him I was too scared to. He called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't been able to see. His friend told us to call the police immediately should we ever see that car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere and he's gonna see me enter or exit my house again. I haven't seen the car since though, so maybe the nightmare is over. I don't have the most exciting life, but it's comfortable. I'm 40, single, no kids. Some people might find that depressing, but honestly, I don't mind. I've got a steady job, a decent house, and no one to answer to but myself. I work as a bartender at a high-end luxury rooftop in a neighboring town, catering to the kind of clientele who think regular bars are beneath them. I don't live anywhere near that level of luxury myself. My place is in a pretty middle-of-the-pack neighborhood, about 20 minutes away, but working there has its perks. The tips are amazing. People in that area aren't shy about throwing money around, and the rotating crowd keeps things interesting. Since the bar is upscale, we don't have the typical regulars you find in a dive. I like that. I never quite liked how close some customers would get with me, or any other bartender for that matter. Maybe that's just me though. I like to keep to myself. I should probably mention that my name's Kevin. That'll be important later. It was a Friday night, our busiest night. The place was packed as usual, with groups of friends clinking glasses, couples on date nights, and a few folks who probably wandered in just to feel important. I always like playing a mental game with my patrons. I try to figure out which ones are pretending to be something they're not. You can tell a lot about people by the way they order a drink. The ones who ask for complicated cocktails are usually trying to impress someone. The ones who order a whiskey neat, they've had a day. I had my eye on a couple at the end of the bar who were down to their last sips of wine. It's always better to offer a refill before they wave you down. I was in my groove, mixing drinks and chatting with customers, when I noticed someone walk in who definitely looked out of place. I clocked the guy immediately. He was clenching his teeth and scowling like he was furious. He had jet black hair that wasn't combed and sat like a bird's nest on his forehead. He was wearing a blank black hoodie under a faded leather jacket, which looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. There were stains all over it, but none of that was as unsettling as his face. Like I said, he just looked so angry. He made a beeline for the bar, but he didn't sit down. He just stood there, staring at me. I wondered to myself how he had gotten past the doorman in the lobby. I cleared my throat and asked if I could get him something to drink, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the weird vibe he was giving off. He didn't answer right away, which was strange. He just kept glaring at me like he was getting ready to swing. Finally, he muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. I nodded, grabbed a glass, and poured the shot. Jaeger isn't a drink we pour often here. Most of our patrons are likely to ask for something a little higher quality. But hey, if someone wants Jaeger, I'm not about to question their taste. I set the glass in front of him and moved on to serve a few other patrons. When I came back to charge him, he tossed crumpled cash onto the counter. That also threw me off. Hardly anyone pays in cash at this place. Again, though, it wasn't my place to judge. The guy didn't say anything as I rang him up, and I was ready to move on when he spoke again. I still remember his exact words. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." I froze. My eyes snapped to his as I scrambled to process what he just said. I put the glass in my hand down and demanded to know how he knew my name. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept my voice low, but I hoped he got the gist of how serious I was. He didn't answer my question, just stared at me with the same angry intensity. Finally, he said, "I know what you did." Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned and walked towards the elevators. I wanted to yell something or chase after him, but I decided against it. I was on the clock. I couldn't just neglect my job. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, completely thrown off. I was honest to God confused out of my mind. I didn't recognize him in the slightest. I couldn't think of anything I had done that would warrant such a cryptic statement. I'm no saint, but I don't go around making enemies. It put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night. When my shift finally ended, I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. I racked my brain for literally any explanation that made sense, but couldn't think of any. By the time I ended up going to bed, I was still relatively unsettled by the whole thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up randomly. I wasn't really sure what woke me up, as I didn't have to go to the bathroom and I'm usually the type of person to sleep through the night. I didn't hear or see anything, but something felt off. Without moving, I kept my eyes open, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. After about a minute, I saw something that gave me an adrenaline rush of fear. There was a dark mass in the corner of my room, next to the door. It was just standing there, but I was 100% sure it was something that didn't belong in my room. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to stay still, pretending to still be asleep. Someone was in my room. I repeated that thought to myself like 6 times before truly processing it. I knew I had to do something. I counted silently to 3, and in one quick motion, I sprung out of bed, screaming like a crazy person. I was prepared for a fight, but the figure didn't come toward me. Instead, he bolted for the door. As he moved, I heard something clatter to the floor. I chased after him through my house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open, and whoever had been in my room was gone. I wanted to run out into the yard to look for him, but I was worried that I'd be walking directly into a trap. Instead, I made what I still think is the smart decision and slammed the door shut and locked it. I thought back to the clatter I had heard earlier in my room. I walked back to my bedroom, turned on the light, and froze. In the corner of the room, there was a knife, just laying there on the floor. It was one of mine, taken from the kitchen. I felt sick. Whoever I had just chased was planning to hurt me, possibly kill me. I called the police right after that, and they quickly arrived and searched both my house and my yard, but found nothing. I gave a description of the man from the bar, and the police got the video footage from my bar, but they haven't been able to find him yet because I haven't heard anything. The thing that freaks me out the most is that I know for a fact I had locked all my doors that night. I locked them every night. During their search, though, the police were never able to figure out how that man entered my house. None of the windows were broken or unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. To this day, I still have no idea how he got inside. I haven't seen him since, but I would be lying if I said I don't think about this encounter often. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want to find food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it had something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept on ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar. One of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything either. No food and definitely not any drinks I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized that they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated at the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved. I was just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she saw anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I was talking about the elderly couple that was sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me, but on the inside though, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time. I just kept repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. When I was a kid, I had an irrational fear of our basement. Though, if I do say so myself, our basement was kind of scary for a kid. It was a pretty big basement. There was an L-shaped couch right in the middle of the basement that sat right in front of a wooden support column. In front of the couch was the big old box TV we had down there, which had all of our video game consoles plugged into. The layout of the basement was set up as a big circle that went around the couch basically. There was a booth and table in one corner, an old bar in the other corner, which had the door to the laundry room behind it, and then in the other corner, closest to the stairs, was the doorway to my dad's little workout room. My dad rented out the upstairs of the house to an old lady named Ruth, so we only had access to the first floor and the basement. My dad would usually hang out in the living room on the first floor, hence why our video games were all downstairs on the crappy TV, because our dad didn't really hang out down there. I'm the youngest sibling. I have 2 older brothers. I was anywhere from 6 to 8 years old when this happened. My older brothers weren't home, so they must have been having playdates with other kids. It was just my mom and I home at the time. My dad was likely at work. Usually I'd be playing video games with my brothers in the basement so I wouldn't be scared. But since I was alone, I remember being kinda creeped out as I walked down the stairs. That basement door sucked because it wouldn't stay open. By default, it would just slowly creep shut unless something was propped in front of the door to keep it open. So it just made me feel even more isolated from the upstairs and my mom. I was playing whatever old video games I was into at the time, alone on that gray fluffy couch. Any little sound in the basement would make me pause my game and look in whatever direction I heard it. There would always be creepy sounds that would come from the laundry room, and even though I grew to expect them, they'd still sometimes creep me out. They were usually familiar sounds though, and so when I heard an unusual sound come from inside the laundry room, I paused my game. It wasn't the sound of the laundry machine or the boiler clacking. It was the sound of something dropping to the floor and bouncing once or twice. I remember jumping off the couch and running upstairs to find my mom, saying there's someone in the basement. And I remember my mom's calm reaction, asking me what happened, and then explaining to me that nobody is down there. To make me feel better, she went back down to the basement with me, and she opened the door to the laundry room, turned on the light, and looked inside for a few seconds. Then she shut the door and said there's no one in there. So naturally I felt better, and she went back upstairs, and I went back to playing video games. I can't remember how much time passed before I went back upstairs to eat a snack. My mom was already preparing dinner. I remember it being dark out now, which only added to my fear of the basement. The basement had 2 small windows, which did allow some light in during the day, so at night it was just completely pitch black down there. I did end up going back down there though, and then eventually I heard the sound of the heater in the laundry room turn on, only it was extremely loud. I turned around and noticed the laundry room door was now open. I got off the couch and slowly walked to the laundry room door. It was pitch black inside of there. I was scared to turn on the light. I just wanted to shut the door. I gathered up enough courage to run at the door and slam it shut and then run back to the couch. For some reason, I just felt safer on the couch. I guess for whatever reason, I didn't once think that it was strange that the door was magically open now, even after my mom had closed it earlier. The next thing I remember was hearing a man's voice from behind me, and at first, my brain didn't register what the fuck I just heard. It didn't seem real at first. I turned around and saw some sickly looking man sitting in the booth in the corner of the basement, with his arm on the table and his head resting on his fist. He said, "My God, how you've grown." I was frozen stiff. I couldn't even scream. I just looked at the man in the corner with my mouth hanging open, twitching. He slowly stood up in this crooked, hunched over posture, and it seemed like he was slowly starting to walk towards me as he said, "Your mother won't let me see you guys." I finally was able to scream, and I just bolted for the stairs. I was screaming "Mom" the whole way up to the kitchen. I slammed the basement door and locked it. I screamed and cried to my mom that there's a man downstairs. I saw the look in her face, and she was petrified. She called 911, and I strangely don't remember what happened in the moments before the police showed up. I just remember a bunch of police officers getting there and going down to the basement. I was with my mom and a police officer in a safe room while they found him. And the man they found was my uncle. My estranged uncle, my mom's brother, who was basically excommunicated from our family for being a child rapist. Our parents never wanted him anywhere near us, nor did my mom want any contact with him. He broke into the house and had been hiding in the basement for God knows how long. I didn't even know his face, as the last time I'd seen him I was a baby. I haven't seen him since then. He went back to prison for another 4 years for another sex crime. We don't know where he is now. It was approaching Halloween. We were in the middle of October. My cousin Andy's birthday is October 15th, so for his 12th birthday, we all went over to our Uncle John and Aunt Melissa's house as they were throwing him a family birthday party. We have a pretty big family, and so our family gatherings can often get hectic. It was still warm outside, so the party was mostly in the backyard. Their house is pretty big, and we always used to love playing hide-and-seek type games because of it. Andy and I are the same age. My older brother Chase is 2 years older than me. He would play with us too. Our other cousins were a little older, but they'd still play with us too. We just make teams and take turns as hiders and seekers and give each other time limits to find the opposing hiding team. If you were found, you'd have a chance to run outside to the backyard to be safe if you managed to not get tagged. We could use the whole house minus our aunt and uncle's bedroom, and I'm not exaggerating when I say there were hundreds of places to hide. In the basement, there's a separate room that's considered Aunt Melissa's fashion room, as we call it. She's a fashion designer, and inside of it she has a bunch of mannequins with different pieces of clothing she's designed. Some are full-body mannequins, others are just torsos without heads and regular stands underneath them. She also has some studio lights, some official camera equipment, and a green screen drop. We had been playing the game for a little while already. Chase and I were hiding now. We both chose to hide in the basement. Chase hid somewhere in the main section of the basement while I hid in the fashion room. I actually grabbed 2 blankets from the ottoman in the basement and brought them into the fashion room, one for me to hide under, and the other one I was going to throw over one of the mannequins as a decoy. With the blanket thrown over it, it genuinely looked like it could be a person hiding underneath. I thought it would be a funny little gotcha moment whenever someone yanked the sheet off of it. So I got into my hiding position under a desk in the corner of the room, and I hid under the blanket. Now it was a waiting game. That was honestly a big chunk of the game if your hiding spot was good. After quite a long time, I heard commotion outside in the main room of the basement as Chase and one of my cousins were laughing and yelling, presumably as Chase was being chased around the basement. I heard them then stomping up the stairs. By the sound of it, Chase was trying to make it to the yard without being tagged. But after that, I waited in silence for over 10 minutes easily. I was getting uncomfortable in this position and quite honestly bored. Finally, Chase came downstairs into the room and called my name, and then he said the food was being served outside. So the game was over. I was starving. I hurriedly rushed upstairs into the backyard where all the catered food was now out and being served. At some point after eating and having a conversation with Aunt Melissa, I remembered that I totally left those 2 blankets in her fashion room. Most importantly, that I left one over her mannequin, which she would not be happy about. So after going to the bathroom, I went back down to the basement and to the fashion room, where I turned on the light and saw that the blanket was no longer on that mannequin, but rather the blanket was covering something else. It appeared to be another mannequin, though this one seemed to be propped in a seated position, which I wasn't aware of any mannequins that were in a seated position. The closer I got, I started to realize that it was moving, and I heard breathing. On top of that, there was this funky smell that wasn't there before. It was a person under there. But who? I laughed and said, "Who is that?" They didn't answer. I felt this feeling of uneasiness growing in my stomach. I looked down to see if I could see the shoes they were wearing, but what I saw was the bare feet of a black person. Nobody at this party was black. I turned and headed for the door. I rushed back outside and said to my uncle to call the police. There's someone in the basement. Others overheard me and panic quickly ensued. My uncle and a few others rushed down to the basement. I followed behind. When we got to Aunt Melissa's fashion room, the blanket was now on the floor, and whoever was underneath it was gone. I swore up and down someone was just underneath it, explaining the bare feet and the smell. A bunch of family members searched the whole house, and ultimately my uncle called the police, taking my claims very seriously. When the police showed up, it was kind of a whole scene and everyone at the party was concerned. Neighbors even came out to see if everything was okay. Every possible hiding place was checked, and no one was in the house. I didn't make it up though. It was genuine what I saw, and I just wish he did turn up so that everyone would have seen I was right. Even if mostly everyone did believe me, I still just wanted them to see what I saw for themselves. During parties, they'd leave the doors unlocked since families circulating in and out for hours, so it's no shocker that someone off the street could have just walked right in. Maybe a homeless person, which would account for the smell. The whole thing still just felt so crazy, and it's a haunting memory for sure. This story takes place when I was 9 years old. I'm now almost 25. I was at my great-grandfather's house in Idaho during Christmas break, visiting family and whatnot. This was also the first year my mom's boyfriend came with us because my parents had divorced the summer before. My grandpa used to live in a small Indian reservation town which has about 1,000 people. My grandpa's house was a small 2-story house that had a lot of field and forest. It was a beautiful house and property, and I miss it dearly. Anyway, about a day after we got there, my aunt, uncle, and cousins who lived in the same town as us came and surprised us by driving 10 hours to visit with us as well after telling us they weren't going to be able to because of work. It was fun because at the time my cousins and I were close. One night, my uncle, my step-aunt, and my cousin, who lived just next door to my grandpa, came over and visited with everybody. The grown-ups started talking grown-up talk. So me and my cousins, Sam who was 9, Evan who was 12, and Kennedy who was 10, decided to go downstairs to the basement and play our monster game. The way this game was played is where Sam and Evan were monsters and they hid down in the basement with the lights completely off, and then Kennedy and I would have to find them. They would make noises so we could kind of have easy access to find them, but not fully. Then if we got near them, they would make monster noises and chase Kennedy and I, and we had to go back to the top of the stairs, which was our safe zone. I know it was a kind of stupid game thinking about it now, but at the time it was pretty scary, but really fun. Anyway, Sam and Evan went downstairs to hide, and they told us to wait 2 minutes before going down to start finding them. Kennedy and I waited upstairs for 2 minutes, and then we went downstairs to find Sam and Evan. Kennedy went down first, and we started looking for them. We just did our normal thing for this game. It was completely pitch black downstairs. The only light down there was the pellet stove and the moon shining through the window. Although we knew it was just our cousins hiding, it was still pretty scary just because it was pitch black and completely silent. About 5 minutes later, Sam and Evan jump out and scare us, and then they chased us. We go back upstairs and decided to play another round. We did our normal thing by waiting for 2 minutes, then heading downstairs. This time, I went first. As we went downstairs, we heard Evan or Sam hit the wall, which made me jump. We continued walking down, when I noticed a figure standing outside the window. I stopped walking and put my hand out to stop Kennedy. She got a little irritated and said, "Come on, why are you stopping?" I didn't say anything, but I pointed towards the window, showing her the figure. Kennedy noticed the figure, then she whispered, "Sam, Evan, we need you to stop the game. There's someone standing outside." Surprisingly, Sam responded to us. I figured he would have wanted to continue the game and not say anything. He said, "You guys are lying, you're just scared." I was starting to get upset because they wouldn't believe us. "Guys, seriously, look at the window above the TV." Then we saw Sam and Evan emerge from underneath the ping pong table my grandpa had for us, and they looked up. Evan just laughed a little and called us pussies, saying it's probably Uncle Stan just outside smoking. I knew it wasn't my Uncle Stan because he always smoked outside on the front porch, right by the front door. I then told Evan that. Sam then said very annoyed, then it's probably Grandpa just checking out the house because you know him. He's always checking to see if the house has any problems. If you guys are worried about it, then go upstairs and check. I then go upstairs to check, but I pretend that I'm just looking for something. I go into the living room, and everyone I knew that was there were all in the living room. It wasn't my Uncle Stan, nor my grandpa, or anybody. Everyone was sitting in the living room. My stomach dropped. There was definitely someone out there. I didn't want to tell the adults because I was worried they wouldn't believe me. I go back downstairs as I'm shaking, and I tell them, "Guys, everyone's in the living room. No one is missing. There is someone out there." Sam and Evan finally realized this wasn't a joke, and their jokish facial expressions turned into scared expressions. Kennedy began to cry a little. I told her not to make too much noise. We all went to the top of the stairs to figure out what we should do. Of course, Sam and Evan were giving dumb ideas like shooting the guy or something. We didn't want to tell the adults, so we just stayed at the top for 5 minutes. Then we went back down. When we were back down, the figure was gone. We assumed that the figure just left and went their way. We decided we didn't want to play the game anymore, so we would just play ping pong instead. We turned the light onto the basement, and when they come on, we noticed the window was cracked open. I thought to myself, was the window cracked open this whole time? I looked towards the furniture, and my heart suddenly dropped. There was a man in his mid-40s, sitting in one of the sofa chairs, staring at us. We were so scared that we just stood there, frozen. The guy began smiling, all creepy-like at us. He then began to stand, and then I yelled, "Run!" We ran up the stairs and slammed the door to the basement. Then we ran into the living room, crying to our family that there was a man downstairs. One of my uncles, who was a cop, went and grabbed one of my grandpa's guns and headed downstairs. My uncle came back up after a few minutes and said there was no one down there, so we assumed he climbed back out the window and ran. The adults believed us when we said there was someone down there because outside there were footprints in the snow and they led to my grandpa's driveway. Nothing was stolen downstairs, so that was good. We were all so scared that we just sat with our moms and hugged them. That night when we went to bed, I was still afraid, so I slept in bed with my mom. My cousins and I haven't played that game since. My grandpa was pretty upset because he thought his windows couldn't be opened from the outside, but he was glad that my cousins and I weren't harmed. My grandfather passed away October of 2017, and I miss that guy dearly. But ever since that incident, I have always been afraid of going into any basement by myself, even as I've gotten older. Although I haven't been back to my grandpa's in almost a year, I still am scared of that basement, or any basement to this day. I used to work as a construction worker and engineer in the Philadelphia area in my early 20s. My co-workers and I would do basic work like constructing add-ons to already standing structures like adding basements to buildings. One of our jobs in 2012 was to construct a small basement area and extend the main floor for a corner dentist building. The basement was to have a bathroom and 2 big storage areas. We were making serious progress. By the time of the story, we had working lights in the basement already. The basement had just been sealed off, so there was no longer a big hole in the ground, and since the lights were working down there, we had a source of light while we worked down there at night. One of my coworkers, Jordan, went upstairs and then outside to help with work on the add-on section outside. I was tinkering with the electrical components a bit. I was no electrician, but I had a basic understanding of what I was doing. But suddenly the power went out. I knew it had nothing to do with what I was doing. I figured there must have been a power outage in the vicinity. The 4 of us didn't keep our phones on us due to the nature of our jobs, plus how dirty our hands would get. We all kept them in our jackets that we hung upstairs, but luckily one of the tools we kept in our vests were flashlights. Before I could even reach and grab for my flashlight though, I started to hear a rattling noise. The closest way I could come to describing it was a bag of coins being shaken, not exactly, but close enough. It seemed to come from inside the tiny, soon-to-be bathroom. I took the flashlight out from the pouch on my vest, turned it on, and aimed it towards the bathroom section. We had already put up a door, and it was slightly closed to be covering my view from the actual room itself. It didn't sound like any kind of infrastructural sound, so I had to imagine it was one of my coworkers. I went to the door, and as I wrapped my hand around the side of the door, I waited a second before pulling it open, just because I needed to gather my bearings. But when I did swing open that door, my flashlight revealed some person dressed in all black, standing facing the corner of the tiny room so that I couldn't see their face. That is, until the person turned their head like a deer reacting to a sound in the woods. All I saw through the flashlight was the glow in their eyes. I slammed the door shut and ran up the stairs in my heavy boots, looking for my coworkers. They were all outside, apparently about ready to pack up and call it a night since the power in all the nearby buildings had gone out. I counted 3 of my coworkers, so it couldn't have been any of them in that tiny room. I asked all of them if anybody else who worked in that building had been there at all that night. They all shook their heads no, so at this point I had to lead them downstairs to show them the creepy stranger in the basement. They followed me to the basement and to the tiny room, and as I feared would happen, that person I saw wasn't in there anymore, or in the entire basement for that matter. I was obviously embarrassed when they didn't believe me, but I wasn't going to hold them hostage and make them believe me. So we all went back outside and packed up. I was the one with the key to the building, so I had to lock up when everyone left. After getting into my car and seeing the others drive off, I can't describe it, but I got a feeling inside of me that made me want to go back down into that basement and check one more time for that person I was sure that I saw. I took a deep breath, got out, unlocked the door to the building, and went back down to the basement. The power was still out, so I walked down the stairs with 2 flashlights on, the one I was using before, and now my phone as well. I made it to the bottom step and then stopped. The dead silence in this cramped, unfinished basement, mixed with the fact that I was anticipating a sound, freaked me out to the point that I was about to turn around and go back upstairs. When suddenly, I heard the rattling again, coming from the tiny room again. I didn't even look, but when I heard it, I felt my heart in my throat and I stormed up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut again. I locked the door to the building and drove home. Thank God it was a Saturday, so I wouldn't have to be back until Monday. I made sure not to work in that basement alone anymore, however, and thankfully we finished the work within a couple weeks, and nothing else really strange ever happened. It was a normal night in the cold month of February. My wife and I were watching a late-night movie in our room in bed before going to sleep. At some point in the movie, the TV suddenly shut off, and the room went dark. My wife and I let out simultaneous grunts in annoyance. The lamps, clocks, everything went out, so the power must have gone out. I told my wife I'd go outside and check if the neighbors lost power too. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the stoop for only a second or two because it was freezing outside, but I could see lights on in the neighbors' houses, so it seemed to be just us who lost power. We have a fuse box in a small boiler-type room in our basement. It seemed unlikely it could have anything to do with that, but I had to give it a shot. I had no idea what else I could do. I went downstairs with a flashlight. One weird thing about our house is you have to walk down the stairs to get to the basement door. Like, the door is literally on the basement level. I was tired, so I kind of slowly and lazily stomped down the steps. When I got to the basement door at the bottom, I turned the doorknob and tried opening the door. It wouldn't push open though. I tried a little harder, but it still wouldn't budge. My wife must have locked it. I went all the way back upstairs to ask my wife where she put the basement key. She got out of bed and said she'd get it for me. I followed her downstairs to the kitchen where we had a key hanger. She flipped around the many keys until she pulled off the basement key and handed it to me. She then went back upstairs to the bedroom, while I went back down the stairs to the basement door. I put the key in the lock and turned it to the right, then tried opening the door again, but it still wouldn't open. I went back up the stairs and called for my wife to come down. When she did, I asked for help like a child, since she was the only one to ever lock this door. She came down the stairs with her flashlight, making fun of me for not being able to use a wooden door. And before she even tried using the key, she turned the doorknob and gave one good push, and the door creaked open. I was dumbfounded. I swore up and down the door wouldn't open. Then I joked that I loosened it up for her. Once again, she went upstairs to the bedroom. I entered the basement, flicking the light switch on, which only led to more darkness. Flashlight still in hand, I went to the boiler room. When I got inside of there, I tinkered with all the switches, flipping them from one side to the other until finally the lights in the basement flicked on. I was relieved. I shut the tiny door to the fuse box. Just then, however, there was a sound from outside of the boiler room, the sound of one of the basement closet doors creaking. I took a peek outside at both of the doors. One was closed, the other was slightly cracked open. My heart started beating faster as I went over to the door. I stood about 2 feet away from that door, listening. For some reason, it took until then for me to think, how would the switch in our fuse box for power be switched off all of a sudden? Then I started to think, what if the basement door was never locked? What if someone was simply pulling it shut? After a few moments of silence, I heard a deep exhale in the closet. I took off for the stairs, this time making sure to lock the door behind me. I had never ran up a flight of stairs so quickly in my life. I ran to our bedroom and yelled in distress to my wife. I was not acting like the man of the house at all. I'll admit I was too afraid. I did call the police though. At some point after the phone call, before the police arrived, we heard the sound of glass breaking outside. I looked out my window, but it was too dark to see anything in the backyard. When the police arrived, I'd led them quickly to the basement, but by then the closet door was completely open and it was empty. We also noticed shattered glass in one corner of the basement and things knocked all over the floor. Whoever was in the closet managed to climb up a ledge where we keep collectibles, smash the window, and climb up out of the basement to the outside. In other words, they escaped and were never caught. That night, we kept the basement and living room lights on all night and locked every door in the house. The next day, we had the glass fixed. We don't even live in a bad neighborhood, so it's really scary to think that something like this could happen to basically anyone. I work as a janitor at a commuter college campus I won't disclose for my own privacy and safety. My job entails cleaning the hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms of varying buildings on campus. Usually I work later hours in the day, like 1 to 9 when the campus is less crowded. There was a stormy night in the summer that I was working. The college offers summer courses, obviously, so yes, I work in the summer too. This was during one of the biggest storms we've had that year, extreme winds mixed with a torrential downpour. It was later in my shift, anywhere from 7 to 8 o'clock. I was currently in the activity center hall, which didn't hold any classes, just a big ballroom, a small theater, and varying classroom-type rooms used for general purposes. It was usually one of the quieter buildings on campus, apart from when events were being held in it. I very well may have been the only person in that building at that hour. I was cleaning in the downstairs section of the building, which held the game room, when suddenly the whole place went dark. Like pitch black, except for the red glow of an exit sign near the doorway to the stairs. The power surely went out. I took out my phone and called one of the other janitors who was working in another building. He told me the power went out in his building too, which meant the whole campus probably lost power due to the storm. After hanging up, I figured my job down there was done, so I followed the glow of the exit sign, but nearly shit myself when I saw someone peering their head from around the stairway. I called out thinking it was maybe someone who worked in the building, but before I could even really say anything, they disappeared upstairs. I ran to the stairway to try and follow, given that I would have to most likely lock up the building now and had to make sure everyone was outside. Quite frankly, when I got upstairs, I didn't know what to do in the total darkness. There were very few backup lights that were still lit in case of blackouts, and they were very, very dim, only lighting up basically a little around their immediate surroundings. I started calling out in the dark, seemingly empty building that I had to close up. Everyone and anyone must get out. The hallway in this building did one big circle around the big ballroom, and backup lights were distributed throughout the hallway. However, like I said, they were far between and extremely dim. I started doing my round through the hallway, and I was pretty sure I heard footsteps behind me. I turned when I was under one of the backup lights, but I didn't see anything behind me. I continued around the hallway, checking each room. When I checked the last bathroom and found no one, I figured the building was empty and safe to lock up. Walking to the front of the building, I heard footsteps again. This time I knew someone had to be behind me. I turned and saw a silhouette standing in the dark just beyond one of the dim lights. I called out, "You have to leave the building," but the way they were standing there just made me uncomfortable. And just then, they turned and ran the other way out of sight. I didn't know what to do, but chasing someone and physically removing them from the building was above my pay grade. I continued for the front door, planning on calling campus police. When I got to the front door of the building, I turned back to the darkness that was the lobby of this building, and about 20 feet away from me, I saw that silhouette again, this time hiding behind a half-open door. I say silhouette because all I could see was a black figure. I didn't see any body or facial features. I left the building and called the campus police. A couple of them came to check out the building, but they couldn't find anyone. Later that night, I got a disturbing phone call. It was campus police. They asked me to describe the person I saw the best I could, but I truly couldn't. I couldn't see anything about them. Then they dropped a bomb and told me there was a killer in the area who was in hiding and was spotted by a local resident near the college campus. When I hung up the phone, I felt a shiver run up my spine. I didn't get much sleep that night. I also didn't feel safe at work for a while after that. used to live in a small studio apartment in Chicago when I finished college. It was not fancy, just a single-room space on the top floor of a 3-story building. I chose it because rent was cheap and it was close to work, and as a 23-year-old with student loans and no savings, I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The apartment was clean, functional, and most importantly, mine. The only window in the place looked out over a narrow alley. Across the way was another apartment building, nearly identical to mine. The alley was tight, barely wide enough for a single car to squeeze through, and during the day it barely got any sunlight. At night it was pitch black. That never really bothered me much. I was working late nights at the time, bartending at a lounge on the north side. I usually got home around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, then I'd make a quick meal and zone out on my phone until I passed out. One night, about a month into living there, I noticed something odd. I had just walked in, kicked off my shoes, and turned on the overhead light when I thought I saw something move in the window across the alley. Just a flicker. A curtain twitching maybe. I froze for a second. But when I looked again, there was nothing. The window was dark and still. I shrugged it off. Maybe I startled someone, or maybe it was just a draft. The next night, it happened again. As soon as I turned on the lights, I saw the curtain shift in that same window. This time I was sure I saw it. A hand pulling the curtain back just slightly before letting it fall. I couldn't see the person behind it. The lights in the other apartment were off. It was just a sliver of movement in an otherwise black void. But the reason this really caught my attention was because I had never seen the lights on in that apartment. I always assumed that nobody had lived there. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about that attic and the hand. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. Every night without fail, the curtain would move within seconds of me turning on my lights. It was subtle but unmistakable. It was the same thing every time. There was a slow parting in the curtain, I had a glimpse of the dark space beyond it, and then the curtain would close again. I began testing it. Some nights I would leave my lights off and sit silently by the window. When I did, nothing happened. But the moment I turned them on, even just the dim light by my couch, the curtain across the alley would shift. Someone was watching me, it was obvious. I tried to rationalize it, like maybe someone just liked looking out their window at night, but that didn't explain the timing. It didn't explain the way it always coincided with my arrival. That was too big of a coincidence. I asked my landlord about the unit across the alley, and he told me it was vacant and had been for months. I pressed him, asked if maybe someone had moved in recently, but he shook his head. He even joked that I was being paranoid. I considered calling the police, but ultimately didn't because I felt like reporting someone possibly looking at me through a window in an empty apartment sounded ridiculous. There was no crime or proof, just a feeling that grew worse every night. Then one night, everything escalated when I came home later than usual, around 4 a.m. The bar had hosted a private event and cleanup ran long, so I was exhausted and not thinking clearly. When I reached my door, I noticed something stuck in the frame. At first, I thought it was junk mail or a flyer, but when I pulled it free, I realized it was a crumpled note. It simply said, "Hey," written in pen. My legs went weak because the first thought I had was the apartment across the alley, so I ran to the window and looked across. The curtain was drawn and there was no movement. I called my friend Jamie, panicking. She lived across town but told me to come over right away. I grabbed a backpack, stuffed some essentials into it, and got out. The next day, I confronted the landlord again. This time, I demanded to see the apartment across the alley. He hesitated, but eventually agreed to meet there with the key. The place was dusty and completely empty, with not a single piece of furniture. The walls were bare, and the floor creaked with every step as if the place were 100 years old. But there, in the back room facing my window, was a single metal folding chair. It was positioned directly in front of the window, and they had access to an apartment that was supposed to be locked and empty. The police were called and they searched the place. I'm pretty sure they took fingerprints, but nothing came of it. The fact that my paranoia was correct the entire time, and that I was in fact being watched, it made me sick, wondering how long the stretches of time that sicko would watch me would be. I moved out that week. To this day, I have no idea who was watching me, how they got in, or how long it would have gone on if I hadn't found that note saying, "Hey." I've considered the possibility of it being the landlord, but ultimately I had to drop that theory because there's no way in hell he wouldn't have went over there to remove that chair before bringing me over there. I still dream about that window, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night certain that someone, somewhere, is still watching me. When I was 12, my family moved to a rural area in Oregon, miles from the nearest town. We lived on a large piece of land surrounded by dense pine forest. It was peaceful, quiet, and completely isolating. The house itself was built in the 1940s. It had the old house starter pack with things like creaky floors, a creepy attic, and a detached rundown shed that sat about 30 feet from the back door. The shed was packed with old tools and junk from the previous owner. My dad always meant to clean it out, but he never did. For the most part, we stayed away from it. I remember the first time I noticed something strange. It was a weeknight, close to midnight. I was up reading with the flashlight under the covers when I heard our dog, Max, barking uncontrollably. Max was a golden retriever, super friendly but alert. When he barked like that, it meant something was wrong. I crept out of bed and peeked out the window. He was facing the shed, barking into the darkness. The motion sensor light by the back door was on, casting long shadows across the lawn. I couldn't see anyone, but Max wouldn't stop. I didn't go out there, I just watched for a bit until he calmed down, then I walked away. The next morning, we found deep boot prints in the dirt between the house and the shed. My dad dismissed it, saying it was probably a neighbor or a drifter passing through, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, Max barked at that shed multiple times. Every time, we'd look outside and find nothing, but the footprints would be back, and they always led to the shed, never away from it. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside my window. I froze. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, moving toward the shed. I peeked through the blinds, and the light by the back door flicked on, and for just a second, I saw him. A tall man standing beside the shed door. He was wearing what looked like a dirty gray coat. His face was obscured by shadows, and then the light went out. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the window. I woke my parents. My dad grabbed his rifle and went outside, but the man was gone. The footprints were fresh though, right up to the shed. This time, my dad decided to check inside. He unlocked the padlock and pulled the doors open, but all there was were just rusty tools and old tarps. He added a new lock and reinforced the doors. For a while, things were quiet. Then, a month later, Max went missing. We searched everywhere, through the woods, up and down the road, even asked neighbors. He was gone. I was completely heartbroken. I held out hope that he'd return and he just got lost in the woods. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about the shed and Max, about the man I'd seen. Around 3 a.m., I heard the back door creak. I got out of bed and tiptoed into the hallway. My dad was already up, holding his rifle. We moved to the back door, just in time to see the motion light flicker on. There, standing by the shed, was the man again, only this time, he was holding something. In one hand, a knife, in the other, Max's collar. When I saw this, I felt like my life was half sucked out of my body, like this horrible weightlessness in which I almost felt like I was gonna fall down. My dad shouted and raised the rifle, but the man turned and ran into the woods. We called the police, and they searched the area but found no trace of him. What they did find inside the shed made me sick. The floor had been cleared. In the dirt, someone had carved symbols, crude, disturbing images. In the corner was a pile of bones, animal bones, hopefully. It got worse. Behind a false panel in the shed wall, the officers found a backpack filled with items that weren't ours. Wallets, watches, and a few pieces of worn clothing. Things that must have belonged to someone. Multiple someones. The strangest thing was a notebook. Pages and pages of strange symbols, incoherent rambling and jagged handwriting, and crude drawings of houses, families, and eyes. I believe that this was some kind of message to us, saying he was watching us like he's watched other families. The police took all the items that were found. That night, while packing to leave, I looked out my window one last time to the shed. The police tape fluttered in the breeze, and all was quiet, but just beyond it, maybe 10 feet into the tree line, I saw a person's face, but the moment I blinked, it was gone. I screamed my dad's name in a desperate panic, yelling, "He's back!" My dad stormed into the room and looked out the window, asking where he was. I pointed straight at the shed and saw he was to the left, right by the woods. He ran to grab his rifle again, and this time he ran outside and screamed like a maniac while firing around. You can't imagine the anger and frustration of having to be chased out of your own home by a crazy, dangerous person who likely killed your dog. My dad was letting his frustration out in that moment. I know my dad wanted to kill that man. We moved out days later to a much less remote part of Oregon. In the summer of 2018, my friends and I, Abby, Marcus, his younger brother Tim, Tim's girlfriend Hannah, and me, planned a weekend trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were all in our early 20s, fresh out of college, and eager to unplug from everything. We picked a spot far off the grid deep into the national park where the trees grew thick, the air smelled of pine and damp soil, and there was no cell signal for miles. The first night was normal. We hiked in with our gear, found a clearing by a lake with just enough space for 3 tents, started a fire, and cooked hot dogs and marshmallows. We told stories, drank, and stayed up late watching the stars. The silence of the forest was relaxing. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel wrong. At around 11 p.m., we were still sitting around the fire laughing when Marcus suddenly stiffened and pointed towards the woods, asking if we saw that as well. We all looked, but nothing was there. He swore he saw movement, a figure ducking behind a tree maybe 30 or 40 yards away. Tim dismissed it as a deer, but then, 20 minutes later, we heard a stick snap in the same direction. This time it was loud. Abby was clearly spooked and said she wanted to go to bed. Everyone agreed to call it a night. We doused the fire, zipped up the tents, and tried to sleep. That night, I woke up to something that still haunts me. Breathing from just outside, probably not even 10 feet from my head. At first, I thought I was still in a half-dream state, but it continued. I was with 4 other people, though. It could have maybe been one of them going outside to pee, but I didn't hear the sound of a stream, just the breathing. The breathing also almost sounded like an older person, someone who was short of breath from smoking too much. I reached for my flashlight, but didn't dare turn it on. The breathing moved from one side of the tent to the other, then it stopped. I waited without saying a word, because it was the only thing I could do. Since the breathing stopped rather suddenly, I felt a sense of relief that my original thought of it being one of my friends peeing was accurate. So eventually, I fell asleep. In the morning, I said nothing. Neither did Abby. But when we met up for breakfast, Marcus had a concerned look on his face, like he was antsy to tell us something. He said someone was outside our tent last night. Hannah nodded and said she heard it too, and noted that whoever it was walked around the tent more than once, and it could have been more than one person. I asked the entire group if anyone got up to pee last night, and that maybe that's what we heard. Tim responded that he did go pee, but that he thought he saw a figure crouched near the fire pit around 4 a.m. We searched the area, and we found footprints in the ground circling all 3 tents. But in a spot where the dirt was a little wetter, more like mud, one of the footprints was very clearly from a bare human foot, not shoes or boots. This made the whole thing even stranger. They led into the woods and vanished. We tried to joke about it, saying maybe it was a crazy hiker or prankster, but it didn't feel like a joke. That night, we stayed up later, talking nervously around a much bigger fire. We kept our flashlights close. Around 2 a.m., we heard that awful sound of the crunching of leaves in the distance, but this time there was a voice. It was a low voice, too quiet to understand, but definitely human. Marcus snapped on his flashlight, and for a split second, we saw who it was. It was a man, fully naked, crouched behind one of the trees nearby. He scrambled back into the trees like an animal that just got exposed. All of us were completely shook. We were too scared to even break off to go into our tents. Staying out in the open with all 5 of us together just felt safer. Hannah suggested packing up and leaving, but Marcus and I said that was a horrible idea. Packing up camp this late and finding our way back to the car would not only be extremely difficult, but also extremely terrifying, worrying that that man was behind us, following us. That night was the worst night yet, and maybe one of the worst nights of my life. I didn't get a single second of sleep. I was wide awake, and perhaps that may have saved me or my belongings at the very least. However many hours had passed before I heard the distant sound of a stick snapping or a leaf crunching. I said out loud, "Please let it be a fucking deer," under my breath. A few moments of silence passed before a voice from out in the woods said, "I see you guys." It was not any of my friends. I didn't know if any of my friends were awake and also heard it, but I heard none of them react, so I guess I was too scared to be the only one reacting. What happened next, I never would have expected though. I heard my tent shift ever so slightly, which caused me to shoot up and look at the tent zipper, and it started to slowly move down. I started to scream at the top of my lungs, causing my friends to also start screaming. Whoever was on the other side of my tent took off, I presume, but I can't know for sure. All I know is all of us yelled at each other to communicate through the tents. I zipped the zipper back up fully, and I didn't hear breathing or footsteps again that night. I didn't fall asleep. I watched as the morning sun slowly started lighting up the place. At dawn, we packed everything and left. On the hike back to the car, the tension didn't leave us. At the ranger station, we told them everything. The ranger listened carefully, then said they've had reports. A man, maybe more than one, living out there. Some said they steal things, and others said worse. I don't know what worse meant, we didn't ask. We laughed it off in the car, but it didn't really feel funny to me. I don't think I can ever go camping again after that, especially after the zipper thing. I take my dog Hemi for a walk twice a day and let him in the yard once. When I take him for a walk around the neighborhood, I always try to take different routes just to keep it from getting repetitive, not just for me, but for Hemi as well. Oftentimes on the weekends, I take him for longer walks since I have more free time, and I don't have the stress of other work-related things still lingering in my mind. On a cloudy, humid Saturday evening, it was one of those times that I decided to take him on a long walk. I'm talking like almost an hour. We were in a part of the neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with. I found a walking trail that was part of the town's huge nature preserve. It was a rather low-key path. There didn't seem to be any other people on it but me. It was a rather narrow path with woods on either side. It wasn't a cement bike path like the other trails in the preserve. Hemi led the way, pulling the leash harder than usual, probably excited by all the new random smells he was picking up. Eventually on the trail, we passed this little square park. It had a swing set and little playground, along with a basketball court, or rather what was once a basketball court, as there were no hoops. I decided to walk in through the little opening, as Hemi was going crazy over something. I was planning on just sitting on one of the benches facing the playground to take a break because I was getting a little tired, but when I sat down, Hemi kept pulling and started barking at something. He'd only really do that when he saw another dog or animal, sometimes people, but less often. So I entertained it and got up and started giving him slack to run towards whatever he thought he saw. I looked into the woods but couldn't see anything. The closer we got, the more aggressive Hemi got, until he was basically choking himself with the collar trying to pull me into the woods. Then out popped a man from behind a big tree. He was laughing and saying, "Whoa, whoa, he caught me." I told Hemi to calm down and pulled him away from the woods. And the man. I apologized for my dog and walked away, as the way in which he came out from that tree was bizarre. He said, "It's all good, dude," as he seemed to follow in the direction we were walking. Hemi kept looking back and barking. I continued to tug him forward. Eventually, I had to turn around and ask if there was something I could help him with, as he even seemed to follow me outside of the park and onto the trail. He put his arms up in the air and smiled. Then he said he just wants to pet my dog. I said, "Nah, he doesn't like you, man. We're just gonna walk our own way." He didn't reply, so I turned and continued walking, faster now. Hemi kept turning around and growling, and every time I'd look back, he'd be the same distance away from me, kind of off the trail a bit, half hiding behind the trees like he thought he was being slick. I was about to call back at him to piss off, but then it hit me this guy might be dangerous. I started running down the trail until I came to the little opening we entered from and exited through that. Back on the streets, Hemi would keep looking back as we ran, but I'd have to tug him to keep running. We ran all the way back to my house without stopping. I actually do cardio regularly, so I wasn't concerned about that guy keeping up. I highly doubted it, especially since Hemi stopped looking back eventually. It was now a couple hours after getting back. Hemi was in his bed, which was right next to mine, when he unexpectedly lifted his head to look at the window and growled. At first I thought it was because of the sound of the rain droplets that had just begun to hit the outside of the window. I was thinking about getting up out of bed to close the window, even though I was already comfortable in bed. Then it happened. A voice speaking into the window. A voice I recognized from a few hours ago, asking if I knew why he was in the woods. Hemi started going crazy. I jumped in my skin and turned to the window. I couldn't see his features or face, but I could see the outline of his body at my window. I yelled, "What do you want?" He calmly asked if I saw what he was doing in the woods. I told him no, and he asked me, "Are you sure?" I said yes with a tremble in my voice. He said okay, and I saw the outline of his body move away from the window. Hemi stopped growling after a few moments. I closed the window and latched it. I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night without calling the police. I told them I was followed by someone in the park, and that he came to my window. The dispatcher asked if the man left, and I told her to my knowledge, yes. She said if he were to come back, to call 911 again. She implied it was a busy night since it was a Saturday. I did feel comfort knowing Hemi would give me a warning at least if he were to come back. He didn't end up coming back though, thank God. The man's words, "Did you see what I was doing in the park?" still don't really make sense to me. I wonder if you were implying he was doing something he didn't want others to see, and that he was worried I witnessed it, but that alone would raise even more questions. It was a regular night in the summer of 2010. I was taking my dog Poppy out for his nighttime walk. I usually take the same route. Sometimes I'll stray down one different block, not always though. This one night, I branched off a familiar block to a not-so-familiar one. All that I knew of this block was that there was an abandoned house on the corner. It's known as the Murder House. I've only ever passed it while driving. The first time I saw it, I slowed down just because it's such an eyesore, sticking out like a sore thumb from the rest of the houses. I never could understand why the town wouldn't just tear it down and build a new home, especially given the house's history. The reason no one ever bought it was because of the murder of a young woman inside, potentially by her boyfriend. He was never to be heard of again. No body, no signs of leaving, nothing. Walking down the block, I saw the house slowly getting closer. I already planned on stopping in front of it to take a look, but Poppy actually stopped before I even did and just looked at the house. I could tell by his ears and his head tilting that he was engaged by something. I looked around the neighboring houses, which were spaced out generously. And our neighborhood has a lot of green, meaning tons of bushes and trees lining the streets. Plus, it was as dark as could get out, and the house was conveniently situated in a gap between the streetlights. It didn't seem like any of the neighbors could possibly be watching me from where I was, so I started walking onto the grass of the property, but Poppy stayed in place. He started to growl and make whimpering type sounds, like he was frustrated. I pulled him hard enough, and he started to follow onto the property. He was fixated on a window that was opened. I stepped onto the house-length front wooden deck and walked to the window. Poppy was still making growling and whimpering sounds. I pressed my face up to the screen of the window, surprised the window was even left open. I started to wonder if maybe someone was still managing this house in some way, whatever that would even mean. Inside the house was dark, but not pitch black. I could see the walls to the empty living room, and then the opening in the wall that led to a back room with another window. As I was observing, I heard the sound of something inside the house, like a blunt object hitting the floor. It came from further back in the house, like in that back room. Having my dog with me gave me some kind of weird confidence boost to go through the side of the backyard. The backyard was literally huge. The grass was very tall, indicating I was likely wrong about any kind of property management. Only thing in the big yard was an old wooden decrepit looking shed in the corner. The door to it was slightly open, but I was more curious about looking in through that window. As I looked inside, I couldn't see anything except an empty black room, probably what was once a mud room. Poppy was looking at the shed, not barking or growling though. He was kind of silent. I walked quietly towards the shed, tugging him slowly and softly to keep him quiet too. The door was open enough for me to look inside the giant shed. It was not empty. There weren't tools or bicycles or anything. There was just this skinny girl standing in the middle of the otherwise empty shed. I say girl, but I couldn't tell if it was just a girl or a woman. Poppy suddenly went ballistic, barking and making these noises I could only describe as a dog's version of screaming. He wasn't pulling to go inside of the shed, he was pulling to get away. The girl's head inside the shed turned to the door and I ran. We ran. Poppy and I ran for 3 straight blocks until I was out of breath. Then we walked the rest of the way back to my house. I went to a house nicknamed Murder House, where a young woman was killed potentially by her boyfriend. And then I witnessed a young woman standing in the middle of that empty shed. I don't know if I believe it was an apparition, or just some girl by chance trying to explore that abandoned house just like me. I was 10 when my parents let my brothers and I get our first dog. I'm the middle sibling, and it was always my older brother and I's job to walk the dog. Our dog's name was Nyla. Nyla was a golden retriever. My brother would walk her in the afternoon after school, and I would walk her at night. I don't remember anything about what kind of night it was. Cold, warm, weeknight, weekend, nothing. All the details I remember are what I'm including in my recounting of this experience. I was like halfway through my walk with Nyla when she looked across the street and her tail started wagging. She started barking and tugging to go say hi to this dog that was being walked by a man across the street. The man made the decision for the both of us to cross the street and allow our dogs to say hi. His dog was a very tiny, fluffy dog. I think it might have been a Maltese. His dog seemed very timid and like he didn't want to be bothered by Nyla. The man asked my name and I gave it to him, and he told me his name. I don't remember it honestly, but we got into this long conversation about our dogs. He really seemed to like Nyla, and Nyla kind of liked him. He was telling me how his golden retriever had recently passed away and he had a bunch of toys and dog supplies that he'd love to give me. I figured, why not? It's my lucky day. He said his house was around the block, so he led the way. I was walking kind of next to him though as we walked. We were in the street the rest of the way back, but the residential roads are usually quiet. After kind of awkwardly walking back to his house, he let me in first. His house was okay, modest, nothing special. He led Nyla and I into the kitchen as he let his dog go run off into a different room. He asked me to have a seat on one of the stools by the island in the kitchen and asked if I wanted anything to eat. He offered me a bag of chips, and I accepted it. He handed me a bag of some off-brand potato chips. Then he just sat on the stool next to mine and started petting Nyla. He was awfully close to me, and then he looked down at the bag of chips, I think, as if he were waiting for me to open it. I put it on the island in front of me. He just sat there petting Nyla, not saying much. I was wondering when he was going to get the dog supplies he promised. He didn't show any signs of doing that though. Instead he was asking me personal questions, making awkward small talk with me. At one point I remember he even patted my knee as if he were my father or something. I remember an overwhelming feeling of discomfort suddenly, so I finally asked about the collar, toys, and other supplies he mentioned. He said he'd be right back and go get it. He said it, not them. I remember picking up on that. He left through one of the 2 doorways in the kitchen. Then I heard him stomping downstairs to the basement. Moments later, I heard him call up to me to come downstairs and check out some of the stuff he wanted to give me. I got up just to walk over to the basement door, still deciding if I'd want to go down. But then Nyla started growling at something behind the open basement door. I looked. There was someone crouched down in the dark hallway. I didn't really know what to think, but I just left the house in a hurry. I got home and didn't say anything to my family. I just went to my room the rest of the night, quiet and shooken up. It was the first and only time I ever felt I was about to be targeted for being a young age. My only explanation was there were 2 men in that house, and the second I'd walk into that basement, the other would have shut the door on me. I didn't tell any of my family about it simply because it made me uncomfortable and honestly slightly embarrassed. Telling the internet anonymously is completely different. In November of 2021, I was traveling from Philly to Las Vegas to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament. I traveled the country a fair amount, and I would normally stay with whichever teams were also competing as a way to save money. This time though, for various reasons, I had to stay alone. I booked an Airbnb not far from the Vegas Strip. I did so kind of hastily, and didn't realize that the neighborhood wasn't the greatest. I thought of canceling and booking something else, but went against my instincts and rationalized that it was close to everything I needed, and I wouldn't be spending much time there anyway. I got to the location and didn't see the host. I wouldn't know who to look for anyway, since the Airbnb profile picture was of a flower. The host gave me the key code to the room I was staying in, a small studio apartment that shared a wall with the host's house. There was only one door in and out of the studio. The first red flag was that the key code for the lock on the door was 1234567. I thought that was weird, but the password for the Wi-Fi was password, so I figured that the host was just an older person who wasn't tech savvy, and the reviews for the room were pretty good. Around 9:30 p.m. is when things got creepy. I was close to falling asleep when I heard a tapping on the window in front of my bed where I was laying down. There were drapes covering the window, so I couldn't see who was making the noise. I responded by saying, "Huh?" loud enough for whoever it was to hear me. A minute or two went by in silence before I heard the tapping on the window once again. I said, "Hello?" pretty loud, and it went away. I was pretty on edge at this point, and immediately wrote a message to the host asking if it was them tapping on the window. About an hour went by before they finally responded saying, "I was going to bring you some water, but it seems like you were asleep, so I left." I was still very much on edge, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I contemplated going for a walk to the store or taking a shower just to clear my mind, but something told me to just sit tight and wait to see what happens. About 45 minutes went by. It's about midnight at this point, and I heard some noise outside. I then heard the distinct sound of someone trying the key code on my door. The attempt failed, but I could hear them trying again. This time I heard the sound of the lock disengaging. The door was unlocked. I threw the blankets off of me and ran to the door as it was opening up towards me and slammed it shut in this person's face. I was yelling, "This is my room, get out of here, leave." They responded in a deep voice from the other side of the door, "Madel said this is my room." Madel was the name of the host. I kept responding with what I said before and called the cops. I spoke loud enough so they knew I was on the phone with the police. Police eventually came and were not surprised at all by the story I told them. They said they would hang around until I called an Uber to leave. The host was very combative and unapologetic. Their alibi for who that person was changed multiple times. When the Uber arrived, I jumped in and felt relieved to be getting out of there. It still creeps me out that I never saw the person who was opening my door. I have a feeling that it was some kind of setup. If the host knew I was flying in from the East Coast, the 9:30 p.m. tapping on the window would have been equivalent to my 12:30 a.m., and the invasion would be about 3 a.m. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but it could have been much worse. My boyfriend Sean and I went on a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. I booked us a stay in an Airbnb that was listed as off-grid cabin. It had a few hundred reviews with a 5-star rating, so I didn't think it looked sketchy. The cabin was an old, one-room cabin with a potbelly stove and a loft area. There was no electricity and it was in a remote part of Vermont down an old dirt road. There was one house about half a mile away that was owned by the host and she was away, so we were alone. We got there around 4 p.m. and had a really nice evening cooking dinner and playing board games by candlelight. We had hiked all day and were exhausted by 10, so I went up to the loft to sleep while my boyfriend decided to sit outside and smoke. About 20 minutes later, while I was in that space between deep sleep and consciousness, I was jolted awake by a large banging sound on the side of the cabin. Before I could yell down, Sean yelled up to me asking if that was me. Confused and feeling like I must be dreaming, I groggily yelled, "No, was that you?" He said no, but didn't seem too worried since he was sitting outside and didn't see anyone. We go camping frequently, so it takes a lot for us to get freaked out by random noises in the night. We figured it was probably a tree branch that broke off and fell against the cabin. I started to fall asleep again when there was another loud bang, like a thwacking sound from another part of the cabin. At this, I jumped out of bed and climbed down from the loft. I met Sean as he was coming through the door. He told me to grab all the sharp things that I could find and go back into the loft. He was putting on a calm demeanor, but I could tell he was a little freaked out. I asked him what he thought it was, and he cautiously said that he didn't know. He said he didn't see anything when he was outside, but he thought he might have heard footsteps. As we were whispering, we heard a small, slow scraping noise that trailed for about 3 feet against the wall of the cabin, then silence again. I was pretty scared at this point and didn't know what to do. Our car was parked about 100 feet away from the cabin, so we would have to face whatever was out there in the dark in order to get to it, which is probably what they wanted. I was also afraid that if this was a human, that they might have done something like slash the tires or block our ability to get back down the driveway. Sean told me to stay very quiet and go back up to the loft while he sat downstairs and waited. He had a hunting knife and a large stick, and I had a few steak knives, but otherwise we were sitting ducks. The downstairs of the cabin had huge windows on 3 walls, half of which were just screens, so if someone was outside they could easily be watching us, or could slash through the screen to get inside. I wanted to stay downstairs, but Sean ordered me to go upstairs, saying that it would be easier to fight this guy without me there if it came to that. I went up and sat in the middle of the bed, clutching an array of knives in my fists. I don't think I ever listened so intently before. Sean yelled out hello to see if he could get any response, or perhaps scare it away if it was an animal. We heard nothing for what felt like 20 minutes. Then the scraping sound came back, much louder, like someone was dragging a rake or a hoe across the side of the cabin. I heard clear, methodical footsteps trailing off around the side of the cabin. Sean then came up to the loft and pulled the ladder up. He said he didn't like how they could see him, but he couldn't see them, and if they came in the cabin, he could at least get the jump on them from up here. We sat on the bed in silence. I was looking at him in terror. It was probably around midnight at this point, and I realized that we were going to be stuck in that cabin until morning. The noises continued and intensified. There was more banging that seemed to be coming from all different sides of the cabin. Intermittently, the scraping returned. This could not have been an animal. The sounds were too methodical, and we didn't hear any grunting like there was a bear or bobcat. And there were constant footsteps, pacing footsteps. There was a clear crunch of one foot going in front of the other all around the sides of the cabin. There would be pauses of 10 to 20 minute intervals. Then it would all start up again. At one point there was a strange rattling sound on the outside, like someone was trying to shake or climb the pipe on the outside of the cabin that fed into the potbelly stove. This carried on for hours. Sean and I just laid in that bed, paralyzed in silent fear, staring into each other's terrified faces. I kept waiting to hear the front door burst open or the screen window rip. I was convinced that we were both about to be murdered, and every gruesome possibility kept playing in my head. I have never been that terrified, but no one ever came into the cabin. We never heard any voices, whispers, deranged giggling, or anything. Just the loud scraping, banging, rattling, and footsteps. Finally, around 5 in the morning, we started to hear roosters in the distance, and the loft was slowly lit by early dawn light. The sounds finally stopped. I got about 2 hours of sleep, because we had to drive into Pennsylvania later that day. My car was thankfully fine, and we packed everything up as quickly as possible to get the heck out of there. Sean looked around the cabin, trying to find scraping marks or clear footprints, but there was nothing. I messaged the Airbnb host to tell her about our experience, and she said it must have been a porcupine. If you could find a porcupine that makes loud banging noises and can walk like a human, let me know. To this day, we debate about what it could have been. Sean thinks it was a crazy local trying to scare us away. Either way, I'm really glad I was not murdered that night. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in an area in Arizona that I had a job interview. Since it was so far from home, I made a short trip out of it. I went with this one specific Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotels I could find. It was about half an hour away from where I'd be interviewing for, which was fine with me. It was off some dead-end, secluded road, and it had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop with me to get work done at my at-the-time current job during the day, so that kept me busy most of the days I was there. I stayed for 3 days. My interview was on the second day that I was there, which was a Tuesday. I would be leaving Friday, so on Monday, the night before my interview, I was practicing interview questions for this specific company, and just generally getting some last-minute knowledge on their firm. I was doing this on my laptop in the living room of the little house, probably around 9 p.m., when there was a tap at the window. I say tap because it wasn't exactly a knock. It sounded more like it could have been someone's finger. My head, of course, swung to the left to look at the window in reaction. I didn't see anyone, but it was also pitch black outside. I was kind of scared to look out the window, but I had to be a man and just do it. And there was no one as far as the eye could see. Just darkness. Of course, maybe it could have been a bug hitting the window. We've got some pretty nasty bugs here after all. The next day, I got through my interview and thought I did pretty well. So for the rest of my little trip there, I explored different parts of the town in my car, ate at different restaurants, and sat in the backyard and relaxed in the sun. Little did I know, I was likely being watched while I was in the backyard. That night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again. A single tap at the window. Now it was obvious it wasn't a bug. I was even more disturbed now, but once again rushed to the window. Even though I saw no one, that didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Since there was no one there, I went back inside and then went to the back door. I stepped outside onto the back porch and looked out to the desert behind the house. Silence and darkness. And then I heard a click. A sound someone made, like clicking their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It was off in the distance, beyond the light from the house. It was out somewhere in that cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any number of those bushes, watching me and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost as if they did it in response, there was another click. I pinpointed the direction it came from, and looked that way. I could see someone now, standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes, blending into the darkness of the desert. I started walking a little closer, then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any closer to that person. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm gonna call the cops if you don't leave." And I saw the person eerily quickly walk away. I theorized it was the Airbnb owner, but obviously that was a stretch and I didn't really know what to actually think. The night following, I was in my bed on my laptop watching Breaking Bad again before going to bed. I think I watched 2 episodes, so I was doing this for about an hour and a half. I didn't hear any noises in the house, though I was definitely giving thought to that encounter from earlier while watching the show. When I finally turned off the light in the room and tried to fall asleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound again, muffled from the inside of the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. Then, a pretty natural response, I sprang off the bed, still in my PJs, and ran to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running, and I called 911. I stared at the house as I spoke to the dispatcher, waiting to see if someone would come out, because all of my stuff was still in there. A police car arrived, and upon entering the house, we did a quick investigation of the house together. It was very small with not many places to hide. Conclusively, I still packed my stuff and left that place that night for a nearby hotel. I contacted both Airbnb and the host, and I was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it may have been the host of the Airbnb. I mean, who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was may have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time.